Yesterday where we kind of built an application from scratch, and so I think we might do something like this again and just keep continuing to experiment and build off of the work we did yesterday. But as always, please feel free to interrupt with questions. This class is completely for you, and if I'm going too fast, slow me down. Got it? All right, I wanted to take some time today and really dive into some of the tools that you're going to use to be a developer, right? The first one, we've used it, we've introduced it a few times, but we're going to dive in and play with all the different complexity that is here. So if you're using Google Chrome, it is the Developer Tools menu, and you get there by going to the three dots and then selecting More Tools and Developer Tools. You could also do Control-Shift-I think, or it might be
Do you want to share?
Yep, I sure do. We will continue to have sharing difficulties all the time. Great. Everyone can see? So, yeah. Three dots, more tools, developer tools, Control-Shift-L, I believe, or Control-Shift-I. Yeah, brings that up as well. For you Mac folks, that's probably Command-Shift-I. But this is something you're going to use all the time. And we kind of went over this the other day. We've been playing with it from the element viewer standpoint, right? So inside the first tab here on the left, Elements, this is one where you're going to explore the document object model and explore the HTML as it's rendered in the browser, right? So in this simple example, you can see that the code that we have here, right, it matches the HTML that's behind the scenes. If I click View Page Source, right, this is all the code that we wrote yesterday together. But what makes this incredible... Oh, I went to the wrong page. Where am I? What makes this incredibly useful is that the actual page itself, what is rendered and displayed here, as we get into JavaScript a little bit later in the course, can change and update in a way that like just viewing the source code won't let us inspect and see what's happening, right? So a great example of this is, what do we have? We have a document .get element by ID. What do we have? Header. Is that an option here? Let's look at one of our elements, right? Let's look at section main, right? So we have main, right? This is the main content of our website. You can see it's got all of our navigation elements in here. If we were to use JavaScript, and I'm going to use a really simple example for this, to just say inner HTML equals nothing, right? So it's going to empty all of that code out. Our page code and the code that we see behind the scenes still shows all of that information. But what we can do with this Elements tab is we can see the current state in the browser, right? So in here we can see that now section main is empty. I can also, in this element viewer, edit the code, right? So we can edit as HTML. I can come in here and just start typing stuff, like, I can put H1, hello, right? And if I click that, it shows up, right? So this is a live representation of all the stuff the browser has done to set up this page. Is everyone tracking along? There's a bunch of stuff. If you right-click on any element, right, you can focus it. You can hide the elements. You can turn things on and off if you're just playing around, right? Almost always, when you're not sure of what to do, right-clicking on something gives you some options that are interesting, and it's worthwhile to spend some time and just get familiar with these options, right? So like add attribute, maybe you'll do that occasionally. If you want to just come in here and say style, background color, FFF, right? Now we're adding the element. Oh, I picked a terrible example because that one doesn't have a right. Add attribute, style, background color, FFF. All right, we've just now made that menu white. Okay, it's an excellent place to play with the stuff on the page. Also in this elements section, we've kind of been exploring this yesterday. Over on the right, you got a couple important tabs here. The main one that is loaded by default is styles, right? So the top element is element.style. So that is any inline element, any inline attributes that are put in here. Like if we'd gone into our code and let me pull up this thing. What page are we on? The index. So if we had gone in here, let's work on this. H1. Style equals color CCC, right? Excuse me. And I reload this page. We can see, if we go to the header, we can see that it has an inline style. We learned about inline styles yesterday. Element.style over here on the right is going to show us that style. And if we wanted to continue playing with inline styles, we have a couple of different options. We can either edit this attribute. We can do that by double clicking on it and start typing things in here. So I can say background color green. Right, we made this all green now. You'll notice that over here this showed up. We were also exploring yesterday with commenting in CSS so that you can turn things on and off really easily. Inside this development console, the development tool here, you can just check these things on and off, right? So that's another easy way for you to just play with and prototype things that work and look good, right? We could put a whole bunch of things in here if we wanted to have fun. We could say background color blue. We can add another one, background color purple, right? And then we can toggle in between all of these things and just rapidly decide which color we actually want to use, right? So that would be one quick use of, we were talking about how would we want to prototype some of this stuff. This would be my method, and this is the way I would use this element style stuff over here. Whenever I find something that's great, right, this is not in your actual source code, so you'd want to be like, oh yeah, I love the green, but I also, maybe we say I love the purple. I'm going to go into my actual CSS script and then attach it to this element correctly so that it's there on every page load. The other thing that's really important, and this is really, this comes into the cascading part of cascading style sheets, you can see all of the rules that have been applied to this element from top to bottom, right? So, you remember when we were working on our CSS file yesterday, we said, hey, by default, we want to have the star, which applies to everything. We want to use Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif as our font family. We want to take off all the margin. All of those rules have been applied to this H1, and you can see them from top to bottom, right? So these were the default styles that come in the browser. So when you were typing pages and we weren't playing with CSS, these are the rules that added the margin and added the padding on all these elements. So this is the browser-centric properties that get pulled in. But then you can start to see as you scroll up closer to the element style at the very top, this goes in order of what they were loaded, right? So this is applied. That's why it's using Helvetica. This has margin 0, which is why there's no margin here. And then all of our crazy stuff that we put in on this one specifically is in the element style. Any questions about that, right? No? We could do something like this, right? And maybe show this off a little bit easier, right? We've got this star that's applying to everything. We can come in here and say margin 1 px, right? So now every element on this page is going to have a margin of 1. And if we inspect that element, right, we can see that, yes, that rule was applied, but because it was overwritten by a rule with more specificity, right, star is less specific than H1, this one has taken effect, right? And it shows you in the Explorer, this one was scratched out. So when you start working on complex projects, and you're trying to figure out what style was set where, you're almost always going to go to this tool, and it will tell you how it got there, right? If we had multiple CSS files in here that were all interacting with each other stylistically, this is going to tell you, okay, activity.css set a margin, but then we overwrote it in a different CSS file. In this case, it's still activity, right? And we can, toggle these things on and off, right? So if we wanted to see what it would look like with a margin of 1, I don't know, it's very faint, but you can see it kind of jiggling a little bit when I check this on and off. Right? We learned this the other day when we first explored this mechanism. The other big use I get out of this view specifically is just scrolling over the section so that it highlights in my browser, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's the one. But it's also going to show, if you notice, like that brown box that's around there, that's showing us our padding, which we get from, it's showing us our margin, right? So we can see here that this element, the nav, has a right and bottom margin of 16. And I can see that visually when I'm looking at this element hovered over it, right? So we know that this main section that has got an ID of tracker is pushed off to the right because of that margin between those two elements. Okay. Anything else in here that we use often? No. For the most part, yeah, we use styles and computed. Go ahead, Andrew.
I think I just muted myself. Is it called computed because is it adding up the totality of anything? Like if you had one element here, and maybe you have this one set to this and this one set to this at some point, maybe one overrides the other, overlaps, so it computes what it actually is in the very end?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So styles is just the list of rules that we set, and especially this is going to become apparent as we start working more with relative units, right? So instead of saying this is 10px, this is 10%, the computed is going to tell you, based on the current dimensions of your browser, based on the other elements that are around it, this is its current values, right? So as we change, I don't know if you can see this, but as we change the size of our screen, we notice that these numbers are changing. Okay, the 16 did not, because if I remember correctly, if we go back to what we were doing yesterday's section nav, yeah, we set this to be 1 REM, but if we'd set this to be something like margin right 5%, when we load this page again, we'll see now that that number will change because it's computed to be this value, whereas the actual style list itself is over here. You also see like this computed thing over here. You see a part of that box model explorer down at the bottom. So we've gone here before a bunch of times. That's the same thing that's at the top of this. The only difference about computed is it's going to actually show you the full CSS values in their current state on this page. And you can break it up and it tells you where it got that value. Okay. Any other questions? That was a good one. Let's change that back so it doesn't drive us crazy. Cool. What else is important, right? The console. We're definitely going to use this time and time and time again when we start learning about JavaScript next week. This is exactly what it's a JavaScript console. I can type anything JavaScript in here. I can alert hello, right? We'll start playing with that. That would be one of the things that you would do here. This is also a great place as you're developing JavaScript on your page, right? Stuff is going to change. You're going to write a JavaScript file. It's going to do some stuff. One of the things that you'll often do when you're writing code is you'll use console.log messages, and you'll say something like hello, right? And let's just show this off real quick. I'm going to go to index.html. I'm going to add a script tag up in my header so that when this page loads, it's going to execute this JavaScript. And I'm going to put in here something that says console.log, hello, my activity tracker has loaded. Right? I'm going to put a semicolon at the end. Right? So when I reload this page, you can see that it's going to automatically output that message to the console. So this is a really great tool, and we're going to use this super duper often. You heard her talking today about like she wished she'd spent more time learning algorithms and things, right? Well, the easiest way to start visualizing what the algorithms are doing is when you're writing it, you want it to output at various steps along the way. So we might come in here and have, I'm going to pick just a silly example, var I equals 0 for I. Wait, let's do it here. Var I equals 0. I is less than 10. I plus plus. All right, so this code is going to run when the page loads as well. And we're going to come in here and say console.log I is currently set to, and then we do plus I. Right? So this is perfectly valid JavaScript. And you can see that every time that loop has run, it is going to output I is 0, I is 1, I is 2, right? This is a super powerful tool for you to just quickly step into your code and see what is happening on the page, right? If it's also a really common thing that if you go to any page on the internet, console.log is a really common thing. You go to a website for developers. Facebook does this, right? If you went to facebook.com or if we went to Stack Overflow, they will often output little messages that are like Easter eggs for other developers to find. So let's just go to Stack Overflow and see if they've got one here. Developer tools, console. Yeah, so they're putting a bunch of debugging information in here, but sometimes they'll say stuff like, why are you poking around in here? Send a resume to jobs@stackoverflow.com, right? Because they're making the assumption that you're a developer and you know what you're doing, right? And you can debug and work on any web page on the planet using this tool, right? So if I wanted to come in here and say, if I wanted to delete an element, for example, I can come in here and modify this way. I can delete it. So one of the things that I would often use with this kind of system is, how you go to like a newspaper website and it'll pop up an annoying box being like, please sign in to log. Like you can just right click on that element, inspect it, and say remove. And now you can read the article, right? It doesn't work everywhere, but you can modify anything that your browser is doing inside the debugging console here. Go ahead, Selena.
So back where you did the loop, I was wondering if anybody can answer why it started at 0 instead of 1.
I know the answer. Does anyone else?
I know you know the answer.
Andrew, go ahead.
Well, first off, you set I to 0. And then, so it started at 0 because you set I to 0. And then it says I is less than 10. So it only goes up to 9 because of that part. And then the I++ is just adding 1 to I every time.
And if we change this to I is less than or equal to 10, now we would expect it's going to go 0 through 10. Right? And we can come, and we see now it ends at 10. Do we know why we count from 0? Why we like to start our loops at 0? There's a very good reason, and we're going to learn about it for sure next week when we start diving into JavaScript. But does anyone just have a guess? Why do we always start at 0?
The way you iterate through arrays, the first place in an array isn't 1, it's 0.
Yeah, that's exactly right. JavaScript, C, C++, PHP, Perl, a lot of major languages you're going to learn just by convention alone start array indexes at 0. There are some exceptions. I can't think of them off the top of my head because I haven't worked in them, but I know there are some programming languages that will start at 1. A lot of ones maybe that are geared more towards children and just teaching them logic. Sometimes those will start at 1 instead of 0. But most of your programming languages that you will be exposed to are 0-based array indexes. And so when you're doing loops like this, it's always just best to start at 0, unless we could have easily changed this to 1, and it's going to do it. I put S in there. How did I type an S? Control S. Now you see it's going to count 1 to 10, right? So if oftentimes if you are building a website, and we're just going to dive into some silly JavaScript stuff, we're building an activity tracker, right? To your end users, if you've got a list of items, like HTML is a great example. When we start making ordered lists, they start at 1, right, by default. So those are going to go 1 through 10. And if you were using JavaScript to create those elements, and you weren't using an ordered list, but you wanted to put a number in here, you can either start your loop like this, where you say I is 1, go up to 10. What is also a pretty common pattern is that you'll go I is currently set to like I plus 1, right? And so that would still start, even though the I behind the scenes is 0, when we output it to the user, we're saying show the number 1, show the number 2. So it'll always be 1 higher than what we're actually using. Cool. Anyway, I didn't want to dive too much into JavaScript, but this console, the console tab specifically, is how you would interact with that, how you're going to start to interact with JavaScript as you're building your pages, right? You're going to start doing a bunch of complicated things like sending asynchronous requests to the server behind the scenes. So instead of using a form to submit data, maybe you click a button, and instead of doing a full post or a full get, you're going to say, JavaScript, behind the scenes really quietly, send a request on my behalf. And so a lot of times, you will use console.log or console.warn, especially when there's errors, to display what is happening behind the scenes. Okay. The next major tab we want to look at is sources. This one, I don't get that much value out of it, other than it just has to be here. I use this maybe once or twice a year, but this is going to tell you all of the resources that were loaded with your page. So by default, it's going to show you index.html. I think it has some, if we any files that were loaded, any images that were loaded. So if your pages are loading very slowly, oftentimes I would come to this sources tab. Let's just pick an example maybe, right? I'll reload this page. So this is a real world page. It's full of a whole bunch of stuff. And it's showing you that even though I went to one single web page, it's loading content from googleapis.com, from some static hosting provider. All the images are coming from there. And you can see this is all the content that was packaged together to serve your request, right? When we were talking earlier this week about loading, we loaded files, we loaded images. Each one of those elements is an individual separate request that your browser makes behind the scenes. And we can kind of show that off here on the network tab. When I reload the page, the very first thing it loads at the very top is our initial request. That's the actual HTML file, okay? But then the next thing, but then it shows you every other request it makes in order and the time it took for that request to be delivered, right? So when we're talking about page performance, you're going to use the network tab specifically to start debugging what are my bottlenecks, right? Maybe you've got a JavaScript file that's too big, or maybe we've loaded a movie, we've embedded a video into our website when that is taking a long time to load because it's giant, right? This network tab is very similar to the sources tab in that the sources is going to show you all the stuff. The network tab is going to show you all the stuff in the order that it's loaded and how long it took for it to get there. Okay, performance. This is another tab. This is a fairly, I think this was added like 5 years ago or something. It gives you a method to start debugging some of that performance problems from the network. So if I click the record button, it's going to profile all the stuff that happens behind the scenes until I click stop. So this would be, if you had a bunch of JavaScript functions that were running behind the scenes, you would be able to use, it's going to track all the network requests that were made. It's going to track if there's any animation, and it's going to track any of your JavaScript interactions on the page, right? I don't think we had any, but that's on the performance tab. This is a little bit more complex. I wouldn't expect you to, we're probably not going to have to use this too often in this course, other than to, for demonstration purposes as we start talking a little bit later on like how the code we're writing is doing in the real world, right? Memory is also similar. It lets you know how much content your page is taking. That's going to be tied to the sources and tied to the network and tied to the performance. All of these things go together. Now, I'm sure you guys have been to lots of websites where you've got 20 tabs open and Google Chrome crashes because the page that you went to is like full of nonsense, right? As a developer, the code you're writing, you care about. You want your users to be able to navigate there. You want the pages to be correct. This debugging console gives you the ability to kind of look behind the scenes and see what the browser is doing, so that you can correctly identify problems, troubleshoot them, and then get them cleaned up. This application, as we start developing some JavaScript, there's a lot of really cool things that is built into Google Chrome specifically. So there's a concept called local storage, so that you can store stuff in the user's browser instead of using a full database. You'd be able to look into some of that information here. We can also create with JavaScript what's known as a service worker that will let us do a bunch of background activities. So you can imagine like we're building an email client, right? We might have a service worker that is checking for new emails every 10 seconds. That will let you, you're able to debug and inspect those things in this application menu, whether you're using storage, service workers, let's see. Yeah, this page isn't using anything. But you can see all the cookies that were set by this website here, right? You can see if there are any trust tokens. There's a whole bunch of complexity in JavaScript specifically inside of modern browsers that you can take advantage of. And we're going to touch on some of those definitely throughout this course. But this application page is one of the easiest ways to get in there and take a look at that. Security. This is just an overview of all the security information for the page, specifically around SSL, things like that. You can view the certificate that was used to encrypt this page. We can come and see here and see that they have stackexchange.com. It was identified. It was created by whoever this signing authority is. As you move into your formal jobs, SSL certificates is one of those things that once you install it the first time, you're not going to touch it again until next year when you have to refresh it and renew it. And that's generally going to be someone that's on like the systems administration side. But we might play around with that a little bit this semester as well, just so you have some exposure to it. It's one of those it's like Git or like setting up VS Code where you just have to do it once or twice to get a sense of how it goes. Almost every time I work with SSL certificates, I just have to go and reread the tutorial I used last time and be like, oh, okay, that's what I'm supposed to put here. And that, I don't know what Lighthouse is. I've never used this before. Let's learn more. Identify and fix common problems that affect your site's performance. This is probably some Google-specific tool. Yeah, neat. Cool. I've never used this before. We can, when we start building our products later on, we might have to just give this a test and see what it does. This looks new. Neat. Open source automated tool for improving the quality of web pages. Nice. That's pretty neat. Yeah, but for the most part, 90% of the time, I'm in Elements, I'm in Console. Those are the two places you're going to live. Elements, when I'm working on, why does this element look stupid? Why is my design terrible? Right, I'm in here playing with this. Go ahead, Selena.
Just to be clear, because I don't remember, Elements, you can go in there and change it, and it changes it for good?
Nope.
or temporary?
Yep, it's just changing it on the current version loaded, right? So if we come in here, and the example we used is I can change
Just
this
to see
title.
what can look better.
Yep. So I can go in here and just play with content. I'm doing stuff in the live page, and you can see I can change this title up here to whatever I want. Selena, right? I can move stuff around, but as soon as I reload the page, it goes back to whatever is the actual source code, whatever's on the computer that we wrote in the first place. But it's a great tool, especially for working on a production environment, or if you wanted to play with some design online. Like we came to Stack Overflow as a good example, and we want to we want to fiddle with how this page looks. We can be like, what would it look like if we change the background to, so like a document get element by tag name body.
And we'll go over those codes you're typing in more.
Yep, that's all going to be introduced next week when we start learning about the DOM, right? Because this is everything that we're seeing here. This is the actual. We've been writing the HTML, which is used to generate the document object model that the browser is working on. So the document object model is everything that's in here, and it looks like HTML because it is, but in reality, it's a combination of whatever is the HTML combined with whatever is the CSS combined with whatever is the JavaScript rendered live. Okay? And so the DOM exists while you're on the page, and as soon as you're gone, now it goes back to just being, source code. But whenever we're here, the DOM is the actual elements as they've been generated and rendered. Like it's the computed version of the HTML, right?
And then the console part.
Yeah.
Because elements does the thing, and then this part does the.
Yeah, this would be just for interacting with the DOM using JavaScript. So while we're on the page, if we had a bunch of JavaScript code here, like this code that we wrote that counts a loop, I could come in here. Let's give a silly example. I could say var name equals Eric, right? Okay, so I have this variable that this page is using. It's name equals Eric. But we're not doing anything with it. But if I'm wanting to go and be like, why is this variable not being echoed or outputted anywhere? Did I set it correctly? I can come in here and say Eric, right? Or name. So name is a variable, and we can see that it outputs the word Eric. So it lets us just interact with the JavaScript engine that exists in this page.
But it won't put anything on the screen.
It can put stuff on the screen, right? I can come in here and say, what did we call this? What did we call our header? H1 style. Let's just do right. Section ID. Yeah, I gotta find something I can quickly. Let's do tracker, right? So document dot get element by ID tracker, right? So the tracker is this element. I can change it by doing inner HTML equals h2 hello, right? So it's going to replace everything that's in this page with a big hello. So I can update this just the same as if I can run this exact code in JavaScript, right? So if I put this in here, and just for the sake of showing this off without being too complicated, I'm going to move this down to the bottom of the page, because that JavaScript in the head is going to execute before the HTML loads. So if I'll just show this real quick. So if I reload this page right now, nothing has happened. But if I put this down here, this whole script block, now you can see when this page loads, the JavaScript inside of our source code has replaced everything that was in the HTML with hello.
Am I asking questions that keep pushing you towards answering JavaScript questions?
Yes. Because everything in the console is JavaScript.
Okay.
Yep. But it's fun for you to start getting exposed to this, because I'm showing off like, hey, next week when you talk about JavaScript, you're going to use this part of the tool. The more times we can hammer, like, the rest of the course is JavaScript for the most part until we get to databases, right? So whether it's JavaScript that we're learning just for fun so that we can make loops and learn the language, or JavaScript that we use to interact with the website, or JavaScript that we write in the back end to actually power the server and do things when we submit forms, everything else is JavaScript. The HTML and CSS is just the display layer of how we build the websites and web applications on their own, right? So when we played with this yesterday, we built this activity tracker. It doesn't do anything. It's just the outline of what will be eventually, hopefully, a really cool activity tracker. We can track our diet and all that fun stuff. But we have to learn JavaScript to make this actually do stuff. Okay.
Okay, and so right now you're showing us the tools
Yep.
that we're going to use.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then are we going to go over more CSS today?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then we're going to go over more CSS next week, and we're going to continue to use CSS and HTML forever. So
okay.
We're trying to structure this as like we're introducing one concept, and then we're going to practice it and play with it, and then we're going to introduce another concept and practice and play with both of them. And now we're going to, going into next week, we're going to introduce a third concept and practice and play with all three of them, so that everything that we do will build off of each other, and hopefully, it will be clear as we go instead of hopefully getting out of sync. But this tool, we've been kind of showing off the developer console a couple of times over the last week because this is a tool I use all the time. And so when someone asks a question, my first reaction is I'm going to pull this up and show you how it interacts, especially in the context of CSS, where you can see and play with, what is the padding actually doing, what is the border doing. Another interesting thing, and this is the last thing we'll probably show off here, is toggle device toolbar. So if you want to see how this web page looks in an iPhone 6, you would click this button, and then you've got a whole bunch of options right here that let you choose a specified preset device size. So iPhone 6 was it was already selected. So this is what our website looks like on iPhone. If we want to look at it on an iPad Pro, like a big old tablet, this is what it looks like. And it's really hard to see, obviously, but you can visualize. We can make this bigger, 100%. Yeah. So this is what it's going to look like on a tablet. That functionality is accessed from the developing toolbar with this little toggle device toolbar, right? So this is something you'll probably do forever as well, especially when you're building your own pages. Any questions about the developer toolbar? I just want to make sure that if nothing else, you are aware of how to turn it on and how to turn it off, because you're gonna need this forever, right? 3 dots, more tools, developer tools, and it's going to tell you you can learn this this keyboard combination, Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I. So if you're more familiar, comfortable typing, right, you can turn this on and off with just the keyboard. And then the other way that we'll sometimes turn this on is you can just right-click on an element and go to Inspect, and it's going to take you right to that element in the Elements tab. Okay, that's the other way we've used this. Okay. The other cool thing, I do this occasionally, but I generally, if you're running this for the first time, yours might show up on the right side. And so I think it tells you dock side. And so you can put it in the left. I can put it in the bottom, which is where I personally like it. You can put it on the right. And then sometimes what I'll do is I'll have this, because we were talking about what great tools do you need as a software developer? More monitors, right? Sometimes I will click make it its own window, and I'll have this up on the left, big, and I'll have my web page that I'm working on my other monitor on the right, and I'll be able to quickly see, I can navigate through here and play with stuff, especially when, if you're ever actually outputting JavaScript in here, this might be full of stuff, and you want to be able to quickly scroll through it and see a whole bunch of information. So, but I personally like it on the bottom, and that's just where I put it, but feel free to put it wherever you want, right? Any questions about this developer toolbar? You're going to use it forever. There are similar tools in Safari. Firefox actually invented this originally way back in the day. It used to be a plugin that was called Firebug. So if you ever hear the word "pull up your Firebug," that's some old crotchety developer that just still calls this a Firebug window. Safari has one. I think Internet Explorer has one now. Microsoft Edge has one. It's going to have very similar functionality. Almost all of them they're going to have an elements view, so you can look at the HTML, the document object model, and they're going to have a console at the very least. I don't have Firefox installed, or I'd show it to you. But this kind of tool will be invaluable, especially when you're building stuff to be used in the real world, because you can't always guarantee that your users are going to be on Google Chrome. You might write some code that only works on Google Chrome, and then your user comes and says, I'm using Internet Explorer and the web page is broken. You're going to need to be able to pull up that browser and use this information. I think Selena had asked a message in chat, which I think is interesting, which is, will we be doing any debugging in this class? And the short answer is, of course, right? You see, even when I'm doing this live, I often make mistakes, and I'm like, why did it do that? I don't know. And the only answer is you got to debug it and try and figure your way. You have to be aware of the tools that you can use to start finding out the answers to a lot of the questions, like why did this happen, instead of It helps you get to the bottom of it. Any questions? Wendy.
So when I go to my live server, it automatically goes to Edge. Does that matter what browser I go live?
For this class specifically, I would recommend using Google Chrome, because Google Chrome has all these, like when I'm showing off this tool, this is a Google Chrome tool. And let me pull up Edge real quick, and we'll do this together. I have never actually used Google Edge to do this, but I can imagine they're, developer tools, and they have the same keyboard shortcut, Control-Shift-I. And so you can see this has, let's make it, Okay, cool. So this has exactly the same stuff we've been working on, right? They just also give us a welcome tab. Welcome to Microsoft Edge DevTools. I don't know. If you want to use Edge, that's perfectly fine. Like, browser choice is a preference. And so as long as you're using a modern browser that's going to give you tools like this so that you can actually debug what's happening, you should be fine. But Chrome is great. I think behind the scenes in Edge, it's actually using Google Chrome to render everything. So they should be very similar in function. You know, the stuff that Microsoft Edge is going to give you is a lot of Microsoft-specific stuff, like whatever this panel over here on the left is and where the favorites are stored. It's just going to look a little different. Right? It's got me like signed into my Microsoft account. I don't know, whatever Microsoft is doing, but you should be able to functionally follow along in either browser. Great question. Anyone else? Nope. All right, chugging along. Yeah. We already really covered this this thing. This is known, just for your own knowledge, this is the CSS box model. So it's talking about the padding, the margin, which is the outside part, the padding, which is the inside part, the border, and then the actual element size itself. Another thing that we did kind of touch on briefly yesterday when we were talking about CSS for the first time is a lot of these shortcuts. So it's really important for you to understand the order of these shortcuts. So if I came in here, we made, here, let's play with one of our H1s. Just so I can quickly show this off. My fitness tracker. Let's do food log. Right? What do we call that? Food log. We're going to give this an ID. No, cancel. Stop. I never ever want to click that. Stop it. ID equals page heading. Right? So we've made ourselves an H2. We've given it a page heading. And I'm going to come in here and we're going to explore the box model together. How this is set up. So we're going to go H2 page heading, right? And we have learned. Let's use border as a really good example. I can do border. Let's not use border. Let's use background color. FFF. Let's do AA. Right. We're just going to pick a nice light gray. You can see now that it's got this thing here. But we have learned that right now this has 0 margin up top, 0 margin on the right, 5 margin on the bottom, and 0 margin on the left, right? And we get this, where did that come from? So we're going to find out where this came from. We can say, who is giving us, okay, it's this main one, section tracker H2. So we're going to turn this off just for the sake of this exercise, right? All right, so I commented this out, and we're playing with this. So now we've got, now I saved over here, we've got 0 margin, and we can see this in our computed, right? 0 margin, up top, right, bottom, left. But what's important is when we come in here and we say something like margin is 10 px, right? So we've set it to 10. We've added this extra space around there, okay? And we can see that when we hover over it. But this is a shorthand for setting all 4 of them at the same time. We can also set each one of these individually, right? So we can do 1 px, 10 px, 100 px, 1000 px, right? That's going to be crazy. Let's do 200 px. And so now you can see it goes from top, it's clockwise, right? So it starts at the top, the first number is at top, the second number is on the right, the third number is on the bottom, and the fourth number is on the left side. Okay? If you want to individually specify, this would be the exact same as if I went in here and we talked about this yesterday. I would say margin top 1 px, margin right 10 px, margin bottom 100 px, margin left 200px. Right? These 4 lines of code are exactly identical to this one single line of code. Everyone tracking? It's important to note that when you're playing with shorthand things like this property margin, border is the same way, padding is the same way, all of the things that control the box model size, it goes clockwise, starting from like noon on a clock, starting from 12 o'clock position. So top, right, bottom, left. Okay. There's another shorthand here, which is if you put 2 items in here. If I do 10px, 20px, right? It's going to do top, bottom, right, right, right? So the first number 10px is the top and the bottom, and the second number is right and left. So you've got 3 shorthand ways to write this. If you just put 1 number in here, everything is going to be 10px, and you can see that here. If you do 2 numbers, it's top and bottom, left and right. If you put 4 numbers, top, right, bottom, left. Everyone tracking? That's the box model. And we're going to use this kind of tool to just make sure we're setting everything correctly inside of our developer console. Right? Whether we get there from the computed tab or from the very bottom of this tab. And the other thing to show off is that we can see here these are the styles that were applied to this, even though the final one that was applied is this bottom one. Right? We could turn that off and go back to the crazy one that is above it. Cool. That is the box model. Let's talk about CSS structure a bit more. I think that'd be interesting. We talked about margin padding. Good. We talked about a CSS reset yesterday. Does everyone remember what a CSS reset file would be? We briefly mentioned it yesterday.
It resets a lot of the like padding and margin and stuff that it puts by default.
Yeah, exactly right. So you can kind of see when you're in here in the browser, there's a user agent style sheet. Okay, so when you load any page, all of these default values and default options are being applied to every element we can write. And we were playing with generic HTML last week, and early in this week, we were just relying on these default user agent styles. Okay, a CSS reset says, hey, I don't want those default styles in here, right? We had to go and fight off the margin of these H2s and stuff. It's doing things like the font weights and things. Oftentimes, the easiest thing you can possibly do is just wipe all that out with the CSS reset. I use those pretty often. But most of the time, you can get away with something like this, which we kind of explored yesterday. We set the font family, whatever, and we individually set H1 through H6 to this. We can come in here and have a star selector and say margin 0, padding 0, box sizing, border box. This is useful, but you can either take it or leave it. I think most of the time, if you get rid of margin and padding, you can see it made our page ugly now, but that's probably what we want because we were relying on some user agent styles that we did not specify. So something like as simple as this, right? These 2 properties, margin 0, padding 0, is 90% of what you want. And then, you almost always want to set a font family because otherwise it's going to be Times New Roman by default, and that looks just atrocious, right? Nobody likes Times New Roman. Okay. Let's put that back. You can also see here that we have 2 star selectors, right? We didn't really cover this, but there is absolutely nothing stopping you from having the same selector in multiple files or even in the same file. Like this is a code smell, right? If I came into this file and I saw, hey, I've got this star selector here and I've got this other one here, you'd probably want to come through here and just turn this into one. But there is nothing invalid about doing that. Okay? We were talking about multiple files yesterday. You might go through here and have, we were talking about like, I want to have a dark mode and a light mode for my website. You might have all of your main styles defined in one spot, and then you have a secondary file that touches all of those selectors that were for colors, right? Like the background color, we set it to this dark red. So you'd be able to swap all those selectors out with a white or a light gray or something, right? But in general, if you're inside one single file, if you've got the exact same selector or the same group of selectors like we were doing with the stars, it's just better practice to combine those things together. It's not a rule, but it will make other people that work with you happy. Okay? Any questions on any of that? Nope. We covered margin padding. All right, we did explore some of these things yesterday, very briefly when we were talking about text align, right? So all of our different options for text align, we have center here, which was moving our element here to the middle of this box, right? We want it to be centered. We have a few other tools here that are useful. We can align left, which is the default, okay? So that you see it didn't change anything from what we had. We can obviously also do right, text align right. And then there's another one which is text align justify, and this one's super weird. Because if you've got a paragraph of text, it's going to try and make it just like a newspaper. Let me see if I can show this off real quickly. Center. Let's go to one of our, do we have a lorem ipsum page anywhere? Let's see. Here, let's just add one. We're going to go to the index, and we'll come down here, and we're going to say P, and we'll say style equals text align justify, right? And then we're going to put in lorem 50. Right? So if I click on this page, can you guys kind of see what it's doing? It's lining up, it's modifying the spacing of all these letters so that it lines up on the right and lines up on the left. If I go through here and let's inspect our element, right, you can see this is the inline style that we put on this. We can play with left is just going to be normal flow of text. It hasn't changed the spacing of the letters. Right. It's going to align everything to the very far right. So if you're working on a foreign language that is right to left, you might use this. Okay. And then the other one is center, which is what we were doing up here with our thing. But you can see the edges of this text, right, on the lorem, unde, bete, or whatever. It's all jagged because we've told it to center each individual line. And then justify. This is the cool one. If you're working on a newspaper or some kind of scholarly article where you want your columns to be lined up neatly, that would be where you'd want to use that. And that's just one of our text styles. Cool. We talked about defining a minimum and maximum width when we're talking about elements. So that's one of the things that's going to help us with making sure our layouts remain responsive. And we can go over that a little bit more. We started practicing with floats, but the main thing to get to be aware of with floats is just one of the tools in your toolbox for how to make a block level element move somewhere else. So we use that in this example. Let me turn all this off so it goes back to what it was. Great. And then I'm going to go through, just because we haven't played with the style yet, and turn off this information. Right. So when we made our left menu and our right content area, we used float to position those elements so it wasn't top to bottom like it would be by default. Okay. But next week, when we dive even further into CSS, and specifically CSS for the purposes of setting up layouts, there are way better tools, and we're going to go over probably two of the major ones. One is called Flexbox, and the other is using CSS grids. Okay, so the floats mechanism is how we used to do web development. You're probably going to get exposed to it pretty frequently in your day-to-day jobs, especially if you go work for a product that has existed for a little while. But there are better tools now that make this kind of layout setup much easier. And when we get to next week, we'll probably go and continue working on this little project we've been building together, and we'll probably replace the floats with a flexbox or a grid. Okay. We learned about the different types of elements, right? Whether it's a block or an inline element, right? A div is a block element by default. A span is an inline element by default, but we've also learned the paragraph tag is a block element. The H1 is a block element. Some of our fancy new HTML5 semantic tags like section, header, nav, those are all block level elements. So the EM tag, which we learned about last week to make things italic, that is an inline element, right? But you can also see when we were looking at this information down here, let's pick one of these elements here. the reason these elements are a block or inline is defined by the user agent style sheet, right? So you can see here that this H1 is a block because the browser says this H1 is a block. When we've been talking about we can make any element be whatever we want it to be, it's just because we can overwrite this user agent style sheet. So the default style of anything is defined purely by the browser. It has nothing to do with HTML as a language, right? Everything that is in here is just, we've all agreed that this should be this way by default. It does not mean that it has to be that way for your product. Anyone have any questions about the difference between block and inline? I feel like we've hit this pretty hard, but it's important structurally from like a design perspective. Andrew?
So I saw, what exactly is the inline block?
Great question. I don't use inline block very often, so we'd have to probably look it up together. So let's just go see what that means, right? So we're going to go to W3 Schools. Where are we going here? Search. And we're going to go to inline. We're just going to type in inline block, right? So there are, as you saw, there's like 700 properties. There's like 73 different tags. I don't memorize the ones I don't use all the time. And so even me, right? I've been doing this 20 years. I still will go look stuff up. Be like, what does it do? Often I find that like if I don't do it, if I don't need to use it, I'll probably never even touch this, right? So we'll see display inline block. Compared to display inline, the major difference is that inline block allows to set a width and height on the element. Okay, so it just means that it's going to be, what that's just telling us is that it's going to operate like inline to begin with, but it has the ability for us to give it a height and a width. So we can, it's really talking about default behavior. So let's try this little example they've got. So they have a bunch of spans here, and let's see how they have them defined. Right, span class A, which is this one, display inline. This is doing exactly what we've been using spans for up till now, right? It's letting the text flow around it. But inline block, this one at the bottom, display B, they're saying this is inline block, and they're putting a height and width in here, which is taking up as much space as it chooses to do so. So we can come in here. I think it would probably make more sense if we did this here. Span class equals B, right? Span. So now I've changed this word consecutor up to have that as well. You can see it's pushing all that content down. But if I did the same thing with the regular inline span, we could, you see here, they've got a height and a width set, and it's doing nothing because inline says, I don't care about height and width, take up as little space as possible. Inline block is just an option to say, like, by default, act like a span, but I can override it. Okay, so that's useful. I've never had a need for it, but it exists, right? And then block, which is the default for like a div, right, or a section or an H1. You can also, as we've seen, overwrite this span and tell it, hey, actually be a block now. And you can see it's doing the exact same thing that all the other blocks do, which is it's also adding like line breaks between each thing. But we could, we were talking about floats earlier, right? Like just because this is display block, I can tell it to float left, right? And now the text wraps around it. This is no longer inside the structure of this page. It doesn't even care about the fact that it's block or not. So that is how you kind of, you're almost always going to use floats with a block level element, right? Something that is block, because you're saying this block was supposed to be here, take it and do something else with it. Okay? Inline block. And then there's obviously, I mentioned this briefly, but at any time you can come in here and say none. It's just going to hide it. And we're going to do that with JavaScript pretty often. If you've got like a menu you want to show and hide based on when we click it, right? If you want to make like an accordion menu or a sub menu, you might come in and say, hey, when I click this button, set display none or set display block. Right? You're going to toggle between those two options in JavaScript to make a menu appear or disappear. So you'd use display none. Got it? Good question. Yep. Great. We'll come back to that later. All right. We did not talk about positioning, but now is a great time to do so. So by default, when we've been talking about the positions of elements on a page, everything is rendered with a static position. Okay, so that's what it means. Like as soon as the line of code exists in our HTML, that's the very very top, right? So it's gonna put it in its place and keep it where it is. Okay, but we have some tools at our disposal. And I'm gonna use this page as an example because it's got some really interesting things. Let's change this back to block. Okay, I can say I've put float left here. This is here. I can come in here and say position absolute, right? And if I run this, I don't know which one I want to. Let's make this a different color so we can see it, the ones we're playing with, right? Yeah, okay, so now these have floated. There's actually two elements here because we've got two here, but we've said this is outside of the context of the page that existed. I want to have, let's make this second one so it's easy to play with. C, and then we'll add class D. So these are going to be here. Make it D. Run. We'll make this one green. Okay. So you can see that the green one, I don't know if you can see kind of behind this one is a blue one. But with position absolute, we can tell it where to be. So we can say top 10px, right? And now this green box has moved to the top of the page, 10px from the top right. And I can say this, I also have the ability to say left, and I can say 50px, right? So all the same units we were using before, any unit, remember we were talking about CSS units today, these can be relative values, so I can say 50%, right? Now it's going to be in the middle with 50% of the page on the left and less than 50% of the page on the right because this box also takes up space. But this is lined up directly with the center of the page. That's what we can do with absolute, okay? The other position type that you're going to probably use occasionally is relative. So it's going to be within the context of the other elements that it was surrounded by. So in this case, because it's inside this div down here, it's going to move it around inside that div. So if I come in here and I say style, background, color, let's make this AAA, so it's just like a light gray. We run it. So it has moved this green box 10px away from the top of this gray box that it's in, and it's still 50% over. So if I made this 0, right, it's going to be at the very top of that. Didn't do what I expected. Interesting. But we can also make these negative numbers as well, right? So this can be like negative 10px, and it will move it up further. Right? I can do negative 20. Oh, excuse me. So relative is relative to its existing position inside of where it was, right? So when we had it at 0px, it already thinks it's supposed to be on this line where it's at, right? CD. If I move this up to here, right, then it should be, yeah, now it's at 0px. So it's relative to its original position. Is everyone tracking along? So absolute is considering the entirety of this page, right? I'm going to tell it what pixel, where to put it, pixel wise. Okay. Relative is wherever it is in the HTML code, I'm going to move it relative to that position. And then static, which is you've got like an intruder, Andrew. There's somebody behind you. Gotta flip them. That was fascinating. And then the default is position static. And if we do this, it should go back to its original position. Let's do position static. Cool, but these are floated to the left. But you can see that if position is static, I can still move it around using top and left. If we take these out, right? Forward left, position static. Perfect. There's another one that is position fixed. And we would use this to have it be fixed in the page regardless of us scrolling. So I could do top 0px. And so if I shrink up my browser, it's probably the easiest way to do this, right? You can see I have a scroll bar now. You can see that this box is moving down the page with me because I have fixed the position of this element to the visible area of my browser. Okay, so you'll pretty often see this kind of thing if you had like a header on our page and our page was really long, but we want to keep our logo up there. We would do position fixed and move that to where we want it to be. So you can imagine if this said, instead of whatever weird, it could be like website logo, right? And we could say we want this to be at the top, and we want it to be right 0px. Now our website logo is always in the same spot regardless. Oh, no, I made it too wide. it will follow us down the page. You'll use this pretty often. You might see it if you've got a really big page. We might want to put a little widget that says jump to top, so it can take people back up to the top. You might use it for logos. You might use it for a heading or a menu that you always want to be there. So I use fixed almost more than any other of these positions, right? I just, by default, when I'm doing my work over my career, I'm just going to leave it at whatever the default value is. Most of the time, I'm not going to touch position. But if I am going to touch position, it's almost always going to be to say fixed, right? Almost always. Cool. Any questions about that? We didn't cover it yesterday, but it's one of those things that it's useful to know about because you will want to use it, and you can do some pretty cool things with it, but it's easily abused. Like, you can overdo it for sure, and the use cases for it are not as apparent as like, oh, we need a heading tag or we need to change the background color. You're going to use those a million times more often than doing position. Any questions? No? All right. We are at 6 o'clock. Pretty good stopping point for break. What do we got coming up next? Yeah. Next, we're going to talk about using GitHub to deploy our portfolio. So that'll be a little bit of a change of pace. We might use GitHub to deploy our cool fitness tracker so we can show how to host our things on GitHub. But really, I wanted to introduce the concept of using GitHub to host a website for you so that you can start working on your portfolio using the stuff we've been learning over the last 2 weeks, so that as we get a little bit more projects on our belt and we want to start getting prepared to start searching for a job later, we'll have all that in place. So we're going to learn about the GitHub portfolio system next, and then we're going to, the rest of the time is ours, so we can figure out, do we want to keep playing with CSS on our little project we started building, or we can review some concepts from earlier in the week or from last week. That'll be up to us. So let's it's 6:05 right now. Let's come back 6:20. Give us 15 minutes, get some sodas, get whatever, a bunch of water drinkers in here, and we'll see you back soon. Recording. I'm sharing my screen. Everybody can see this. What we're going to dive into next is a magical thing that GitHub provides us, which is free web hosting. And it's cool because as a developer, you're going to be working inside of, probably going to have a GitHub account, and you're going to use it all the time for the rest of your career. This is an excellent place for you to host your portfolio. If once you get a little bit more fancy, you might want to go off and buy yourself a domain name like andrewbuckholtz.com or something. I encourage you to do so. The quicker you can buy your own domain name, the better. I've been fighting. There's a movie reviewer in Texas. His name is Eric Harrison. He's got ericharrison.com. If he ever lets that lapse, I'm hopping on it. Right now I have ericharrison.info. But what GitHub gives us is free hosting. So when we talk about hosting in the context of our websites, we mean we're going to put all of our HTML, all of our CSS, all of our JavaScript onto a server somewhere in the cloud so that anyone can access it from anywhere in the world. Right. We have this little server that we've been playing with that is built into our Visual Studio Code that lets us experiment with our website. But if I wanted to show Andrew what I was working on, I would have to have some kind of server to make that happen. Or if I wanted to use something that was running on my computer, I would have to go into Windows Firewall and say, hey, I'm going to allow web traffic from the internet to port 80, because otherwise, as a personal computer, a lot of that stuff is blocked by default. We don't want random people going to websites on our computer. That's a security vulnerability. But GitHub has given every developer that uses a GitHub account an excellent way to host their content for free. And we're going to show that off today. It's really, really easy. If you've been creating repositories successfully for the past 2 weeks, this should be a breeze for you. And we're going to do that together. And maybe we'll, as we continue building our fitness tracker or something, we might, on my account, I might upload that there and we can play with it together. But for y'all, I strongly recommend, and we're really going to talk about this every night for the next couple of weeks as our major project, is the idea that you should start working on your portfolio now. You guys have learned just enough HTML and CSS to start being dangerous. Now is a great time to start, just like we did with our project here. Just start laying things out. Start making the frameworks for something that is going to be beautiful in the future. And then we, as we start meeting together on Fridays for office hours, we can review that together, and we can look at ways to improve it and make each of you individually really stand out to future employers. I will say this: I've been hiring software engineers for almost 15 years now, and The resume is nice, but if it's got a portfolio link on it, I have hired people because they had a really cool portfolio. Okay? So having some personality there is important. We're going to start that today, and we're going to host it with GitHub. So let's, if you all follow along, I'm going to kind of go a little bit slowly here so that we can do this together. If you just go to GitHub, okay, we already have a number of repositories. You can see I've got a bunch in here for myself because we've been playing with this. You guys should have a week 1. You probably have a week 2. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new repository. Just click the new button. And then what we're going to do is, this is the part that is magic. You just have to know this exists. The repository name is going to be your name, your username, CBC12 instructor in my case, whatever you've picked for your thing. Oh, cool. Neat. So I found a secret. If I just call my repository this, it's a special repository that you can use to add a README file to your GitHub profile. So I didn't know that existed. We just apparently found an Easter egg. Okay, but what we're going to keep doing is we're going to say .github wait, what is it? What did it say? Yeah, .github.io, right? So it's going to be your username .github.io. Okay, we're going to say my portfolio as the description. Let's add a README. Good. So that's all we're going to do. We're going to add a README, and it has to have your username .github.io. Is everyone at this step? Cool. Stop me if I'm going too fast, but otherwise we'll chug along. Click create repository.
Hold on.
Yep. I clicked too fast. Say hold on faster.
Okay. You said the username at what? IO?
It's your username .github.io. So like, I don't know if you can still see my screen. Mine is CBC12 instructor.github.io. So if it's exactly like this, that's what your repository should be.
And README.
Yep. Okay, we're all here. Now we're going to copy the URL here from the code box, and we're going to pull up git bash, or for the Mac folks, your terminal. Okay. Now, right now I'm in my CBC12 activity folder, the one we've been playing with. But what I want to get to is just my CBC12 folder. I want to make sure that I'm not in a repository. It doesn't say main or anything in here, right? We want to verify that on the line we're in. So I can do ls. I can see all of my folders that I've been working on. And what I'm going to do... Yep, go ahead.
I was having a trouble time earlier trying to get out of the main.
Yeah, you probably did the same thing we had a problem with yesterday. So you probably have a broken repository. Let's schedule some time tomorrow for office hours, and we'll just get you fixed up, because it's going to be like a couple different steps. But
yeah, I know.
What you can do is you can make a brand new folder somewhere else, like on your desktop or someplace. If you, as long as it doesn't say that you're in a repository already, if you're in any folder on your system that is not a repository, if you can get there, then you can keep following along. Do you have one available to you?
Oh, you mean just like open up a empty folder? Like,
yeah, if you're just in a folder that is not a part of a repository, it doesn't have any blue text after it.
Oh, okay.
I'm in my CBC12 folder. This is not a repository, but all the folders that are in here are. And so, as long as there's no blue here.
Okay.
All right, we good to move on? Or are you still playing, Wendy?
I'm trying to. I gotta put all these windows down. I'm sorry.
No
Go
worries.
ahead.
I should have given you guys a heads up. Come back from break with everything cleared out so that we're ready to go.
Yeah, I wind up. It's so much stuff.
Yeah, I have 6 or 7 different Chrome windows up, and I've got code editors for work and for school. You get more monitors, is my opinion.
Yeah.
You need. If I could have 12 monitors right now, I'd be the happiest. I'd be sitting in my little throne.
Okay. So Okay, so I'm making a new folder.
Yeah, let's just make a new folder.
Mhm.
And you're going to do that with make dir development or something. And then if you cd into that,
So I can call it whatever I want to call it.
yep, the folder name is irrelevant.
Okay.
We're just trying to get you in a place that's not in a repository already.
Okay, so now we're doing the Mictor development.
Nope, that was just for Wendy's benefit.
Oh, okay.
As long as you're in a folder that is not a part of a repository, so I'm using my CBC 12 folder to like hold all of my projects for this class. As long as it doesn't say main at the end, right? When we were in activity, now I'm in a repository. I want to be not in a repository.
And then what's the PWD again?
PWD is print working directory, so it's going to give you I am here, and this little if we're using get bash, it's telling you that you're there, right? Because we've learned that this little squiggly, the tilde, means that's my home directory, which in this case is C users me. Yours might have a username in there. If you're on a Mac, it's going to be like /home/Andrew is cool or whatever his username is.
There is just mkdir, right?
Yep, mkdir, and then the name of the directory that you want to make. Right, so I made one called development. That's going to say it already exists. But as long as you make that directory, then when you type cd, you can cd into it. And then if I do pwd, now you can see I'm in C users me CBC 12 development. Pwd is a fun command. You're going to use that pretty often.
I don't know. I mean,
And then clear will clear my screen. I like clear.
So while we're sitting here, so we're in CBC 12, and then you hit ls and it tells you all the blue folders that's in there, and then you hit get status and then it says that. Yep. So what does that mean?
That means we can only use git commands if we're inside of a repository. So if I was inside one of these folders, it would tell me if I had any files checked in or checked out, right? We learned last week we're going to want to use git status all the time. And this is just another way to verify that I'm not in a repository. So if I was in week 2, right, git status, it's going to tell me all the files that need to be checked in, all the ones that still need to be pushed up to the server. But if I just type get status in here, because I'm in my CBC 12 folder, it's going to say this is not a git repository, which is exactly what we want, right? There's a bunch of different ways to verify that. I'm using git bash, which shows me what repository I'm in. But if I'm using a different, I might be on a server, and this type of display might not be here. We had, who was it? Estrella, maybe? You were on ZSH, which didn't have any, and Andrew was on ZSH as well. Like, it didn't have all this nice, pretty stuff in here. We had to add that.
Okay, and then so the blue things, like the week 1, the week 2, those are each considered their own repositories?
Yes, these are all separate folders. They don't have to necessarily be a repository. Like this development folder we just made is not a repository because we haven't done git init, which would turn it into a repository.
Okay, because I was like, my new folder that I made is blue.
Yeah, the folder itself will show up as blue, but what we're looking for is that light blue that we see when we're in a repository. I'm going to highlight it here on my screen. You see where it says main. That's letting us know we're in the main branch of a thing that Git knows is a repository. Okay, so as long as that's not there, and you're in a folder.
Well, mine still says main.
Okay. We're probably going to have to fix you on Friday or even later today. We're going to have to do the same kind of steps we did yesterday, which is find out where your actual Git repository is, and then delete it. Because I think what probably happened is you created the Git repo. You probably typed git init. You were showing off all the stuff you were doing today. You probably typed this in a folder above, right?
Mm.
So if I'm in CBC 12 right now, right? We know it's not a repository. If I go into my home directory and I type git init here, now I'm in a repository. But if I cd into CBC 12, right, it thinks CBC 12 is a part of that top repository that we just created in my home directory. And then if I'm in week one, right, this was already a repository, but now everything's broken because when I run git add, it's adding it to the top repository, the one that's up. So the way to fix this is you have to go up until you find the folder where it stops being a repository. So now I know it's in my home directory. That's where that shows up again, git status. And then you can see if we do ls-a, well, there is a git ls-a.git, right? There is a folder in here called .git that we need to remove. And that was what we walked through together the other day. And now we see that if I go back into CBC 12, it's no longer a repository because CBC 12 wasn't a repository. But as soon as I made a parent folder a repository, it assumes that all the children folders are a part of that parent.
That's what I keep getting mixed up on.
So we have to be very careful when we type git init. We want to make sure we're doing it only in a repository or only in a folder, that is not a repository or not a part of a repository. So that was, that's one of the things I'm going to encourage you guys to get really good at checking, which is as soon as you see this little blue main here, right, you should know I'm already in a git repository. I'm never going to type git init. And then the other thing that we did that gave us that error that Selena pointed out, I could do git status in here, and it should tell me we are not in a git repository. Okay?
Yep.
So anyway, we want to create a repository in this folder, and for that we're going to use the command because we just created this in GitHub. We copied this code. Does anyone remember the command that we're going to use to say this repository exists on GitHub, I want to pull it into my computer? What git command will we use here? Go ahead, Wendy.
Git clone.
Git clone, exactly. And we're just going to do git clone and then paste that long string we got, which is git@github.com, CBC 12 instructor. Yours is going to have your username, .github.io. So it's going to make, when I hit enter, it is cloning that folder, and it's going to put it inside. It makes a new folder, a subfolder. It's putting it inside the folder I'm in. And so now, oh, excuse me, I have to sneeze. Hold up. We're back.
Too much soda.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
Yep.
Don't go ahead yet.
Okay.
Okay, so you did git clone and then the thing and then enter and then okay. My thing wasn't pasting and so I got behind.
Yep. It should always be. You remember when we create a repository in GitHub, it's always going to be the same two steps. We're going to copy this URL. We're going to do git clone, and then just
my keyboard. I was trying to do the paste with keyboard. It wouldn't let me. So what's the difference between git clone and git origin main?
Okay, so when we're doing behind the scenes, if we'd done this the other way, so I'm going to do this as an example. I'm going to clear my screen. If I go to development. Right, this is not a repository. We can see that if I type git status, it fails. If I was to create a repository here, and I say git init, now this is a repository. When I want to link it to GitHub, I'm going to do git remote add origin, and then I'm going to paste in that URL. Wait, where did it go? I paste in this URL. So this is doing the exact same thing that git clone is doing. All git clone is doing is it's saying when you pull down this file, it's also running this command behind the scenes automatically. This remote add origin is putting in that reference to link the server to your local computer. And it's not doing anything special. We call this origin just by convention, but I could call this GitHub just as easily. I could say, this is just our name for what that is on our computer, right? So I could say git remote, and it's going to show us I have a GitHub thing here. You can have multiple servers connected to your Git repository. If you can have a version that's like your production web server. You can have a version that's your GitHub repository, and you can have as many remotes as you possibly want. But the reason we've been using the word origin See, I'll just add another one, right? Even though we have this in here, I can say origin, right? And now if I do get remote by itself, it's going to show that I have both of these listed. So it's just telling us when we do get pull or get push, I can specify get push origin main. It's going to tell me push my main code up to GitHub origin. But if I had a different server, they're both linked to the same address. But if I did get push GitHub main, it would go to GitHub. The word origin, or whatever you put after add, is just a convention. Everyone, when you read a tutorial in the future, they're almost always going to tell you to use origin.
Okay, and then the git clone.
Yeah, all git clone is doing is it's saying, hey, create a new repository from a different place and name it origin. So if we go to that other one that we just created, right, it's the same, it's linked to the same. So I'm going to cd into cbc12 instructor.github. If I type get remote in here, even though I have not added that get remote, it's going to have origin already defined, I think.
Okay, so it's just naming it in a sense?
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
Yep. Anything that is defined with get remote, I could do get remote rm origin, right? I could remove it like this. That would unlink it, so it wouldn't exist.
Okay.
So that I would no longer know that if I say get pull, it's going to go to GitHub and get that information. Get clone just jumps, it smushes like 3 steps together into one. So instead of getting init and then get remote add origin, it's doing that by default. And it's going to pull it down the first time.
Okay.
Yep. Everyone tracking? So I'm go ahead.
I do want to let you know I have the same problem with WinNeed. I think my CDC12 is a repository.
Yep.
Yeah, I have the same problem.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
If everyone's got it, let's walk through how to fix it together. I'm going to make this really complicated to myself because this was actually something that was crashing Wendy's Visual Studio Code the other day. She had gone into her C drive and had I'm going to do it in C users so it doesn't break the whole computer. But she had done get init up here. Oh, I have permission denied. I'm not an admin. Somehow she went in there. She's a super administrator on her computer, and she's allowed to create a thing there. So I'm in my home directory. If you do pwd users me, right? I'm in my home directory. I have just created a Git repository. The problem is Git, as we've seen when we're doing web development, it assumes if I do Git status right here, every folder in this folder and below is now a part of my Git repository. So if I went into any folder here, pictures, right? This is my personal pictures folder. I might have pictures of my kids in here. Everything's great. You can see that I am in main here. And you can see that I'm in users, me, pictures. And I can do get status in here. And you can see that all this stuff is not tracked. Now the problem is we're trying to work on individual projects inside of a subfolder of this folder. But when I'm inside CBC12, it's showing that I'm in main, but the problem is Git doesn't know that I care about this repository. It thinks I'm caring about the one above us. So if I do get status here, all those folders are there. If I go into one of our ones, we were working on this activity tracker. If I do get status in here, it knows that we're in the right spot. But it can cause conflicts as we're working, right? It can throw all kinds of errors. So the way to always fix this is we're just going to cd ... all the way up until main disappears. So we could say, oh, main dropped off here. Okay, main is we're no longer in a Git repository. If I type Git status, it's going to say this is not a Git repository. So if I go, yep.
So to help the people who are kind of needing to get out there, do you want them to get to the point where they're able to not see main anymore now?
We're going to just cd up. We're going to do cd ... until main disappears.
Listen, I was doing that, but then as soon as I CD to my desktop, it goes right back to main.
Yeah, so then that means you probably have, that's exactly right, what we did. We went up until it wasn't there anymore, right? So I'll do it with your example here. So yours is on your desktop. So I'm going to go into me. I'm going to remove this real quick for the sake of... I'm going to go into your desktop, right? And so on your desktop, you have a CBC12 folder, right? So let's just make one in here, CBC12, right? So now mine kind of looks like yours. We have a git init. We're gonna create a repository in here, and you can see that if I type pwd, I'm in C users me desktop CBC12. That all is correct, right? But what we don't want to have is actually having a repository in CBC12. And the problem that you're having, Wendy, is that you actually have a repository in your desktop. So you did get it in here at some point. Okay.
Is that what it looks like? Wendy, is that what it looks like?
Yes, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Can I share it?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll stop presenting and we'll take a look at yours.
Sorry, yeah.
I'm trying to teach, the thing that's most important here is the steps to correct this are always the same. You're going to go back as far as you can up the chain until you no longer see the Git repository. And then you're going to go down one step and start deleting repositories until they're gone. But go ahead and share and we'll take a look together.
Can we just delete all the repository?
What?
So we delete all the repository that's underneath?
You want to delete all the repositories that aren't supposed to be a repository. So I have the CBC12 folder and I have like 5 other folders in there. Those are all supposed to be individual repositories. But if I had one in the CBC12 folder, that's not supposed to be a repository, so I would delete that one. If I had one on my desktop, it's not supposed to be a repository, I'm going to delete that one too. I'm going to move all the way up and down until the only thing that's left is the repositories that are actually real.
Okay, so what it wants to look like is you've got your CBC12 and it doesn't have main, and then you've got CBC12 week 1 main, because that's a repository.
That's an actual repository that we want to exist. But the problem is, if you do it at any folder that's higher up the chain, right, it could be the C drive itself. If we have a repository in there, it's going to make everything down the chain look like a repository.
Okay.
Okay.
Because Git is going to, by default, track literally every file and folder beneath it.
Okay, how you find the repository? Is it like a different color or?
Nope. We were showing you that in the console, which is when you're CDing around, and we'll use Wendy as a great example here. So she is in her home directory, right? Her current directory, if she type pwd, is going to say C users me or something similar to that, whatever her username is. We could tell this because her little yellow part of her path there is a squiggly bracket. It's a little squiggle, like tilde. So she's home right now, and we could see it doesn't have main in there, right? So that's good. This is not a repository. If she goes into her desktop, if you type cd desktop, and hit enter.
Okay.
Oh, go back. Yeah, so she has a Git repository in her desktop, which means every folder in her desktop is going to be a part of that Git repository, which includes her CBC12, which includes everything else. So the way to get rid of this is to type rm-rf.git. So we're going to delete the Git folder. Yeah. No, there's a space after the rf. Yep. So now, as soon as you hit this Git repository is deleted and will no longer exist. Perfect. Now, if you cd into your CBC12 folder, that one is no longer a repository. So you're all caught up. The solution is always the same, which is you're going to want to go up as high as you can until the repository is no longer there, and you're going to want to delete the highest repository in your folder. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Again.
No, happy to help. I'm going to reshare my screen, which is this one.
You know, doing that cleared up a lot for me right there. So it's very helpful.
That helped me too. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it helped everybody, because this is, behind the scenes, right? Git doesn't know anything about what your project is. It just knows I exist in this folder, and I'm going to track everything in the folder below me, which is how we've been able to go in here and make a CSS folder and make a JavaScript folder, make an images folder. Git is going to just watch everything below it. And it's always going to watch it from the spot where you type either git init, or in the case of what we just did, where we did git clone. Git clone is one exception to this, right? If I go to CBC 12, we were in this folder when we ran git clone. Git clone is going to create that folder named whatever your repository is on GitHub, as if we had created a folder ourselves and then gone into it to type git init. That was when we were talking about on Slack today. I don't know if you guys watched the thing. You're either going to do a git clone or you're going to do a git init. You'll never do both. So when git is always like, I'm going to make a blank directory here, blank repo, right? I'm going to cd into it. If I do git init here, this is going to create that .git folder that we just deleted that was wrong. So anytime you type git init, it creates a .git folder. Tracking? If I was to type git clone in here and paste in that stuff from where was it? Git clone. Let me just grab this to show this off really easily. I'm in a Git repository right now. We all agree it's here. You can see the main. If I paste this here, oh shit, shoot. If I paste this, it is cloning this into this repository. Git does not tell me that I'm already in a repository, but now I have a folder in here that if I cd into this, this is also a repository. So now I've just created a repository inside a repository, which is not what we want, right? That's never what we want. So the correct solution, regardless of which part I'm in, right? There's always going to be, if we do ls-a, there's always going to be a .git folder. And all you have to do to clear this out is rm-rf.git, right? And the reason that this folder still thinks I'm in a repository is because the one above it, the folder above it, has a .git file, right? So all I have to do here is rm-rf.git, right? And so now you see the blue main disappears. Git status would tell us we're not in a Git repo, right? So you're never, ever, ever going to do git clone if you're already in a repository, and you're never going to do git init if you're in a repository. And so just get super duper used to checking. If you don't trust this blue text or whatever that's there, right? Because we know if I type git init, if I do git checkout -b, I'm going to make a new branch, right? Fun branch, right? The word that's here might not say main. It might say something else. It might say, this is just telling us the branch we're in, right? But just be on the lookout for the blue. And if you're using ZSH, you're on a Mac, maybe you're on an unfamiliar computer, you can always type git status, and it will tell you whether or not you're in Git. If we're not in Git, I'm going to delete this folder again, rm-rf git. I can do git status. It's going to say not a Git repository. Everybody tracking? Does that clear everything up for most of you? Go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, so you know how like you told me to just make another folder. So now that folder is not in my Git repo, so it won't go to GitHub or.
Correct. Yeah. If you're in a brand new folder, like I just made this folder, it's not linked to anything. It doesn't know GitHub exists. It doesn't even know Git exists. If I type git status, this is not a Git thing. So what we're going to do in that blank folder that you just created, we are going to want to create our repository from this cool page we just made, this new repo. So we're going to copy the green, and then as long as we're not in a repository, we're going to type git clone and then paste that in. So I'm going to use shift insert and hit enter.
Okay.
I have this already. The folder exists. Right? So if I type enter, it's creating that repository as a child of this folder. Right? So if I type ls, that folder now exists. The project itself is a child. Okay. Everybody kind of understand the flow a bit better?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to go back to my other one I created that's real. I'm going to rm-rf blank repo. We don't need that. And what we're all going to do when we're all caught up, we've got our little github.io repository here. We're going to cd into it. Well, CBC instructor. Actually, we can probably switch. Let's switch to Visual Studio Code. Now that this folder exists, we're going to click on File, New Window. So we're going to bring up a blank editor, and we're going to do Open Folder. We're going to navigate on our computer to that folder, cbc12instructor.github.io, or whatever your name is. Right? And we're going to select the folder. So when you all get to this stage where you've got an editor, and you should see we've got our README in here. Okay. Let me know. Give me a thumbs up or something. Thumbs down from Selena. All right, I'll keep waiting.
Were we already supposed to make that folder like a GitHub repository or something, or like is it just a folder now?
What was the question?
Like, is the folder supposed to have anything in it?
It should just have your README file from when you did git clone.
Okay.
It should be exactly in the same spot as this, right? So it's got one file in there. It's the blank one that was created. So it should just have this. We're good. Selena's good. Estrella, how you doing? Thumbs up. Leah, still working? Andrew's good. Wendy? Thumbs down. We're waiting on Wendy. Cool. Gregory, how you doing? Yes or no? Maybe?
Hold on, I don't know what mine's doing.
Okay. Share your screen. Let's take a look.
It might be fine, but yeah.
Alright. Cool. No folder open. Okay, you probably did new file. So let's click on file up at the top. Yeah, and we're going to do open folder. And then just click select folder. Yeah, just click the button on the bottom. Yeah, perfect. So now you've got the folder opened, and it gives you that project information. Yeah.
Now we're good.
Now we're good.
Okay.
Wendy, how are you doing? One minute. Gregory, how you doing? Eric, how you doing? I got it. Yes. I'm glad we spent some time working on Git today because it seemed like we breezed through some stuff that was causing some issues. So that this was good. What does this mean? Are we practicing our typing?
I play guitar and banjo, so they're just like
I play guitar too.
finger exercises.
Cool. I've never done those. Is it supposed to build up like strength or dexterity, or what's the deal?
It's just like precision, I guess.
Oh, nice. So you're like trying to specifically hit the pads?
That, and when you do the band, sometimes I sit there and do like rolls for like the banjo and stuff like that. So.
Neat. I've been playing guitar for like 10
Yeah,
years. I've never done anything like this.
It's just like working on like dexterity.
Nice. Well, that's probably why I'm bad at guitar. I've never done these exercises. So you play guitar and banjo. Does anyone else play any instruments? No? Cool.
I'm gonna share this because my computer is so slow.
I used to play trumpet.
Trumpet. Nice.
I think I had almost did what. Hold on. Let's see. Okay, so that's the right one because that's the folder that I created.
Okay, so that's the wrong one.
When I hit, is it?
Yeah,
well, that's the one I created.
Yeah, we created a folder, and then inside that folder, in your Git brash, did you do a Git clone so that you created the GitHub folder?
Oh gosh.
So what we did.
Talking about here?
Yeah. Yeah, perfect.
So
So
it's clone.
you want to be in whast81 github.io. So we want to open that because where you ran that git clone
On.
means that
Oh,
it's not in that git portfolio folder. So you do open
so
folder.
okay. I did see something. Mhm.
And then we're going
This one
to
right
edit
here.
that one. Select it. And we should be there. Nice. Perfect. Alright, cool. So you got the README file.
Okay.
So everyone's all at the same spot. I'm going to share my screen now. And we'll do the fun part. So the fun part is that GitHub, because we've created this special repository, is going to be a server for us. So he made a file called index.html. You got some feedback from Wendy. I'm going to mute you.
Oh.
No, you're good. Rename. If we name this file index.html, and just for the sake of just showing how this works, we're going to do exclamation point tab to bring up a little thing, our little framework of a website. And I'm going to come in here and put Eric's portfolio. Right? And I also, as I mentioned yesterday, stylistically, I like to have everything indented. So I'm going to have it to be that. Then I'm going to add a single H1 element, and I'm going to say Eric's portfolio. Right? So everybody, once you get to this point, give me a thumbs up.
You're making an index HTML file inside of the
Should be inside of your username.github.io folder.
okay.
We all good? Wendy? Still waiting. Okay. Take some time. The next step is really the end of this little experience. So.
Okay.
All right. Cool. All right, sweet. So all that's left to do is check in our source code, right? So we created the new file index.html. We're going to use the source control inside of Visual Studio just for ease of use. We're going to click the plus sign. It's running git add behind the scenes. We're going to put in a commit message, initial entry, right? Then we're going to click the check mark, and we're going to push. So what we've done, if we go to GitHub, which is here now, we now have an HTML file in here. Okay, everyone following along? But this repository has a special name. cbc12instructor.github.io is the URL, it's the web address for our website that GitHub is hosting for us. So if we paste that into our browser window, we should see my portfolio. Wait, it's putting out the README. That doesn't make any sense. Interesting. I don't know why it's doing that. It is not following directions. So let's delete this file and see what happens. I'm going to delete this file. What was the question?
Where they getting the QR code?
There is no
That
QR
QR
code.
code. And the QR code. The website.
The website
No.
is going to be yourusername.github.io.
Oh.
So I'm going to move this to the recycle bin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take out this README because it's breaking for some reason. So let's say moved README.
Are we all gonna remove the README?
We might all have to. I follow the directions, and their directions have led us
It
astray.
works for me. I have the
Work
the
for you?
HTML.
It might just take a few seconds for the actual code that we've checked in to get. Oh yeah, there we go. I just need to do. Remember we were talking about caching? It cached the README, and then when I went back to the page, it didn't give me my new content. So if it worked for you, yeah, great. You can leave your README. It was just broken because I had a cache, and all I did to clear that cache was I did Control-Shift-R, which does like a hard refresh. So now we've got a web page. But this is your personal URL. You can put this on business cards. You can put it in your resume. This belongs to you. It's something nice that GitHub does for us. They're giving us a place to put stuff and a good clean URL. And the other cool thing about this is that from a portfolio perspective, if you're talking, if you're going to put your portfolio or something up here, it also automatically gives us, this is your GitHub username, right? So if I was to come in here, we were going to make a project, and I needed to know who you were, I could just pull this right out of the first part of your URL. Okay. Other things to note is just like any other project we've been working on to date, you can have folders in here. So we can make a CSS folder, and we could put some style information on this page by using like our link tag that we've learned about. Link rel equals style sheet, href equals css slash eric.css, right? And if I have this file in here, new file, eric.css, I can put a style in here, and I can say body, background, color. Let's make it just like let's make it a darker gray, right? So I've created this CSS file, and I'm just breezing through this for the sake of just proving that it works. Adds CSS. Did it upload yet? That's still waiting. Okay, so apparently what happens is as soon as you push it, it takes GitHub a few seconds for it to distribute those changes.
Do you need to add the meta UTF-8 at the top of CSS?
Nope. Nothing goes in CSS files except for CSS. Are you talking about in your HTML file, this one?
Yeah, the meta char set in the CSS. I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing that will ever go in your CSS file is properties and selectors like this. So we were talking about yesterday, if we were doing inline styles like this, style, right? This would be inside your HTML. But when we're in an external CSS file, all that goes in there is just the rules. So if we went in here and said H1, font family, whatever, Gill Sans, whatever that is, just CSS goes in those files. So I don't know how long it takes for GitHub to deploy our pages. Let's see. There you can go. Now it finally got deployed. So there's some kind of delay between when you push your changes into GitHub to when it actually shows up on this github.io thing. So 30 seconds to a minute, it seems like. But you can see that all the stuff we've been learning to date, all the HTML and CSS stuff, and then when we start learning JavaScript in a couple of, in a couple of classes, you'll be able to write JavaScript in here. You can host all of the stuff on this special website where we don't have to pay for nothing. We don't have to give them our credit card information. This is just free. And so what I would encourage you starting today is for the next couple of weeks at least, start putting together your portfolio. And I would very strongly encourage you to spend time with office hours. Let's go over this together. This is a great resource for you to use to put yourself out there. As we get closer to graduation, you want to start getting hired at places. So this is your opportunity to be expressive, to be creative, to be funny and whimsical. showing a little bit of some of this, the side of you that's interesting, right, to an employer, right? We don't want to put a bunch of stuff that we wouldn't feel comfortable putting on a resume, but we want to show off that, like, hey, I'm interesting. I wish I had a great example to show you from the guy I hired before. His was like a fishing themed portfolio, and it still had all the cool websites and projects he worked on, but he enjoyed fishing as a hobby, so he had like funny little fish backgrounds and stuff. It was really cool, but it was super well designed. So if you're going to do something on your portfolio, either keep it really simple if you're not a designer, or if you are very artistic and you really want to spend time playing with it, that sort of thing gets you noticed and makes you stand out compared to your peers. I am not an artistic person, so my portfolios are usually either ones that I've built from a template or ones that I've built from, I would just keep it super plain. Now, I will give you, in the context of building a portfolio in this class, there is a whole bunch of shortcuts. So once you're out of this class, if you're not a designer, you'd want to go search Google and say, like, free HTML portfolio templates, right? And you're going to have websites like this that are going to give you thousands of really good examples that people have made for free so that you can use. Now, I wouldn't recommend going and just using it exactly how it is. You'd want to still change out the background color. All the content on these pages will need to be about you, but this is a great starting point. We're learning the basics of building websites together, so we're doing things the hard way. Every project I work on starts from a template. Every single time. I don't think I've ever done something from scratch since like 1996. Okay? Or it's going to come from someone, when you're working on a company, it might come from someone on your team, like a designer or a UI front-end person. Go ahead, Andrew.
Do you know any good websites for maybe like pieces of templates? So maybe if you just wanted, like, I wanted to piece something together, like a cool nav bar and a cool this or that, or should I just extract pieces from these websites?
Great question. The short answer is I'm sure there's some exist. You're talking more like, I just want a component of this, right? I would search, we can search Google and see now, right? Web components, web design components. Right? There's, I don't know. I almost always will start from a fully developed theme or a fully developed template, because I want the heading and the logos and all this stuff that's been placed there to look good with all the rest of the stuff. When I start with a template, I'm almost always going to change the colors. I'm almost always going to take out things I do or don't need. There are some really great HTML templates if you start building on projects together, like HTML5 admin template, right? So I'll almost always use something like this, like an admin dashboard, which has a whole bunch of components already built together in a bunch of different HTML files, and you'll be able to mix and match bits and pieces of this. That's kind of what you're talking about. But I would start from a full theme and then mix and match what I need for my use cases. I don't, there's probably some design blogs and some places where people focus on individual elements, like here's how to make a really nice drop-down menu or something like that. But to me, that's just quicker to go get a really good pre-built thing and go from there. Like, let's look at one of these. Architect UI. I don't know what that one is. That's cool. And what I'll do when I'm trying to start a new project, I'll come in here and I'll explore it and be like, oh yeah, it has a commerce view, or it has some pages, like a register button, right? So all the things I don't have to design as HTML saves me a ton of time. I can focus on the back end and actually making it work, right? All of this would come with this template, including like cool little widgets like this, right? I don't know what this does, but they're just kind of showing off, hey, we spent all this time designing this thing. Here are all the components that come with it. And they'll come with some examples and drop downs, and that's pretty cool. So this is what I almost always do. And I would encourage you, especially as feel free to use some inspiration from some of these sites, but don't let that be an exercise in skipping corners, right? Because especially going into your first job, if you're building a portfolio, you should be able to talk about each individual element on that page because you have placed it there lovingly. Once you've done this for 5-10 years and you know everything regardless, you can be like, I picked a really great template and I swapped out components, right? That's like a senior level engineering trick. But as a junior, they might ask you questions about something that was put on your page that's complicated. You might not have an answer for it, right? So over the next 3 to 4 weeks, we're going to have the homework is going to get progressively more challenging each and every day, which we've seen. But during lab time, whenever you're not working on homework, let's work on your portfolio. Let's start putting together the pieces, just like we did with this yesterday. We're not going to have everything working yet. We're not going to have stuff to show off yet. But as you start kind of creating placeholders for us to plug in content as we go, this will be the structure of your portfolio going forward, so that as we're doing things we do want to show off and we do want to be proud of, that there's a place for it on our portfolio. Okay? Any questions about GitHub Pages? Now that this repository exists, you're never going to make another one, probably. But I think GitHub Pages was saying that you can create a bunch of different things. I don't know. I only ever use it for this use case, but pages.github.com will tell you all the things that you can do here. They also have a templating language as well, which is definitely something we can look at next week if you want, or probably in a week or two when we've started learning JavaScript. It's like a whole templating language where you can put some like dynamic content in here as well. Cool.
Wendy, did you have a question?
I think her hand is still raised from before.
Oh, I didn't know it was still ready. I'm in VS because when I went live, I didn't see anything on my portfolio page, so I'm just trying to refresh everything.
What was your vhast whast .github.io? Yeah, so it looks like you haven't pushed it yet. So you probably skipped the step where we were in source control. And you can share your screen. We can walk you through it just to make sure you're caught up. Yeah, it looks like your file's been loaded. So let's click the 3 dots and click push.
It says something about my server port was 550 or something at the bottom when
that is our local server. Alright, so it is pushing.
Okay.
So you should be caught up now. And if you go to whast81.github.io.
Oh, I have to put that here in the lab. Okay.
Address of your special thing.
So just copy this right here.
Yep. So there you go. Did it load for you?
Don't look like it. I think it's.
Did you have any content?
Yeah, I put. I put Wendy's portfolio in the title.
Do me a favor and go back to GitHub. Let me see what that looks like. Oh, your file is capital I index. That needs to be lowercase I think. Yeah. If you go to the capital I, it works. But that needs to be lowercase index .html. So what we would want to
So
do
where
is
am I?
you're going to go back into Visual Studio Code and rename your file. So if you click on the two files up in the top left, and we're just going to right click on index.html and go to rename. And then make sure that that first I is a lowercase I. Okay. Perfect. Now we got to go back to source control, the third tab on the left.
This one?
Yep, because we have to tell GitHub now that our file name is different. Let's make a quick change in there. Let's put an H1 tag inside your body. Down, line 11. And let's say H1 Wendy's portfolio.
Good tab.
You need a closing, like a greater than sign. Yep, perfect. And then type in Wendy's portfolio. And then save. Alright, now it's going to let you check in that change. So it should show up on the left. Okay. Once that's done, we're going to do a git push. And in about a minute, everything should work perfectly.
So I'm going to see like Wendy's portfolio twice.
Yeah, the one up top, the one that's in the head, is what is in the title bar. So that's like the tab. Wendy's portfolio should just show up in your page now. And in the title bar. Cool. All right. If I go here. That's annoying. This is probably not going to work. Because Windows is case insensitive for file names. So the fact that you changed it from index with an uppercase I to index with a lowercase I means that Git doesn't know that you changed the file name. But GitHub is case sensitive, so it's trying to serve lowercase I, and that file doesn't exist. So what we're going to have to do to fix this is remove the file completely and upload a new file after we've removed it from GitHub. So the way to do that would be you're going to go to Visual Studio Code. Let's copy all that HTML there so we don't have to retype anything. So we're going to do, select everything, Control C. Actually, you know what? There's an easier way. Let's go to the, on the left, the Files tab again. We're going to rename our index.html file. We're going to rename it something ridiculous, like test.html, so that it completely changes to a brand new file. Rename.
You said test?
Yeah, test is fine. Perfect. Hit enter. Okay, great. So now GitHub knows that there's been a file rename. So it's going to tell you you've got that changed. So over on the left where it's source control, it's going to say we removed index and we replaced it with the other one, right? So we're gonna add those files. Yep. Click the pluses. Yep. Do both.
Hmm?
Yeah, you're gonna click the plus on that index as well. Yep. Okay. And then we're going to put a message in the message box and then hit the check mark. Yep. Now click check. Good. So what we've done is we've tricked Windows, because Windows doesn't care about whether letters are capital or lowercase. We've said, hey, there was a file called index.html. Now it is gone, and we're going to watch a new file called testindex. Great. So we've just checked that into Git. Now we're going to go back and do the same thing, but in reverse. We're going to go to our files up in the left. Yeah. Nope. The two files in the menu. Yeah, right there. The Explorer. And we're going to rename this test index to just index. Index.html. With a lowercase I. Yep. Enter. Then we're going to have to check that into version control. So we're going to click, if you hover your mouse over the word changes, there's a plus sign in that as well. And if you click the plus sign in the changes, a little bit more to the right and up where it says changes, it's gonna add both of those, stage all changes. So we're going to click that, and it's going to save us some clicks. Okay, now we're going to add, we'll type fixed index as our message, and we'll commit. Yep. And now we're going to do the push. So this is a silly thing that you only will ever need to worry about if you're on a Windows computer. Because Windows is not case sensitive. All right, cool. So, if I reload your GitHub, it should show up eventually.
Check the GitHub first.
Uh,
I don't have to do that.
Let's see. Yeah, now it should work. Yep. So you're going to go to whast81.github.io. So you can pretty much take all that out. whast81.github.io. Yep. Oh, it's going to paste all your that's your HTML. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Let's take all that. You can just do Control A. If you hit Control A, it's going to select everything in that box. Then you can hit backspace. Yeah. So all we just need to put here is WHAST81.
Is that it right there?
Nope. Yeah. Here, I'll paste the link to you so you can just copy it. Where's the comments box? Here we go. Yeah, you can just grab whast81.github.io in there, in the README, in the bottom. Yeah, or from there is fine too.
And now I want to take this to the live
No,
server.
you just want to paste it in the URL bar where it says github.com. You just replace that with that. Okay. So you probably have to go to /index.html at the end. So I pasted a link in chat, which will take you to your page.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. There you go. We're all at the same spot. Cool. All right, so that is GitHub Pages. As I said, I would encourage you very strongly over the next couple of weeks to start playing with your portfolio. I would also encourage you to schedule some office hours and we can look at it together. I can, from the perspective of a future employer, someone who's going to be hiring software engineers, I'll tell you the kind of things I'm looking for and the kind of things that are exciting to me. But this is just my opinion and perspective. So if you've got a vision for what you're going to do with your portfolio, you do that instead, right? This is supposed to represent you and your work and what you're going to bring to an organization. Cool. All right, it is 7:30. We've been kind of chugging along for about an hour. Let's maybe take a 10-15 minute break and come back at 7:45, and then just finish out with a quick review of anything we want to talk about, and then we'll be done with week 2. Cool. All right. See y'all in a bit. Share my screen.
How do you put the 2 videos together?
How do I put what videos together?
I know you. Oh, you just pause it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you just
Yep.
Okay.
All right. We're at the end of week 2. We did it. Great success. So far, we've learned Git. We've learned a little bit about how to navigate around the command line. We've learned how to use Visual Studio Code. Earlier, last week, we learned about Markdown, which led us into HTML, and then now we're starting to dabble with CSS. Next week, I thought we were starting to introduce JavaScript, but it's even more complicated CSS. Next week, we're going to learn about responsive design. We're going to start learning about Flexbox, grids. So there's a lot more of CSS to learn, and that takes up all of next week. But we really have, we've laid the foundation for everything that we're going to do going forward. I think JavaScript is week 4. Does anyone have anything they'd like to talk about or go over again?
Do you have any projects?
What's that?
Do you have any projects?
Yep. In this class, you'll be working on lots of projects.
When is the nearest project?
Or
group project?
The first project is the portfolio, which we just talked about today. So you're gonna work on that project from now until the day you graduate. As we get into JavaScript and we start learning how to work on pages, we'll probably do a couple of smaller projects that are around like what we were doing with this fitness tracker. We'll continue to work on stuff like this as we go so we can introduce new concepts. Then as we get to like week 8 and we've really learned just about everything from a purely programming side and it's mostly focused on database stuff, then we'll start working on an actual final project. Previous classes have done a single group project. Sometimes in the past we've done a couple that we would split up into a couple of groups and they'd all work on different projects. It's going to really depend on how you guys are doing in coming weeks. If there's strengths and weaknesses of the team that we can really figure out a way to like put you guys together. And then, there's always the opportunity if Andrew's passionate about a fitness tracker, if Estrella wants to make something, a website for tracking dog walking hours or something like that, we'll have the opportunity to pick the type of project we're going to work on together in such a way that I'm going to come up with a list of requirements of things we're going to do in that project, and then you guys, whether it's individually or as a team, will work on it and meet those requirements. And then all of these projects that we're working on, I would strongly encourage you to put in your portfolios, which is the main project that will follow you along from start to finish. Good question. Anything else? A lot of the project-based work we're going to do through this entire course is at the discretion of us and as a team, right? So when we're working together, we get to pick what we're working on as long as it fits what we've been learning. Go ahead, Wendy.
Let's see. I noticed when you talked about the shortcut to the whole layout, the exclamation and tab.
Mm-hmm.
But then in another video, I saw it's like a lot of other tabs. So I get kind of confused because I'm not a design type of person anyway. And it's hard for me to try to visualize like how the different H1, 2, and 3 supposed to look.
Mm-hmm.
Like because so I got confused with like the title. What's the difference between like the title
Yeah.
being at the top or the heading? Like because it all looks the same. It's just like
It does. So I'll use the fitness tracker file I have up. Right. So this title in the that's inside the head. We learned about last week that the head contains information that is outside of the web page. So when we're looking at this title right here, it is this page that we have pulled up. It's what's going to go in this tab, the URL. This is the title bar, right? So the title goes in the title bar. It is completely separate, though. In these examples, we have a H1 in here, which is a heading of a level 1, heading level 1. I put in the same word, my fitness tracker, and that is just a convention I picked, but I can put literally anything I want in here. I can say Eric's fitness tracker, right? And when I save this page, you'll see that the title, in the title bar, the tab, still says my fitness tracker, but our H1, which is a big heading, says Eric's fitness tracker. Everything that goes inside of our body tags, so I'm going to shrink these up, right? Everything between this opening body tag and this closing body tag is the web page, right? It's everything from like here all the way over. This is our body. Anything that's meta is outside. So in the title example, it's the tab. Other stuff that was in this page, like we briefly touched on it. This is just telling the browser that we're using UTF-8 encoding. So if I was to go and let's find a Unicode smiley face. Right. Cool. I could copy this text, and I can paste this into my web page. Right. I could put my H1 is actually a big smiley face. And if I go over here, it will render because we've told the browser that we can accept Unicode. Okay. So a lot of the stuff that happens in the head is stuff about the page, and everything in the body is the page. Does that make sense? But if we use these interchangeably, and I come in here and say this is my fitness tracker, or like we just did in the portfolio, where yours was like Wendy's portfolio and you had it in both places, the Wendy's portfolio that was in an H1 is the actual word that shows up in here, and the other Wendy's portfolio was in the title. If we did not put a title in here, right? This is like we can not have a title. And then now it's going to put the URL, which is usually pretty ugly. If you notice, like this title says week 2 Google Slides. It's letting me know, hey, this is Google Slides, and I'm on the week 2 thing. So you're almost always going to have some kind of relationship between what you want to put in the title and what you want to put in as your H1. Like in the real world, what I would usually do if I was building a fitness tracker, right? This would probably have a name, and it would be like something like Fit Wizard, right? That's the name of the product. And then I would probably put the name of the page I'm on in here at first. So it'd be like my fitness tracker dash Fit Wizard. So that if I've got 20 tabs open in here, I can know which one is which. And you'll probably want to include a product name in here. So the product name is Fit Wizard, and we probably want to make the title Fit Wizard as well, right? The H1. If we were building this as a web application, Fit Wizard, right? But the page I'm on is the activity tracker. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so when you have these 6 headers, you don't have to use 6
No.
headers.
The one we're going to talk about this next week when we learn about search engine optimization. You only ever really want to use one H1. You're telling Google, Yahoo, Bing, whatever search engines exist, that whatever the H1 is important, and so they're going to use that as like the primary keywords to associate with your page. You can use as many H1s as you want. We could literally come in here and put a bunch of H1s, right? We put 6 in here, right? Right. This is valid HTML. I could put as many H1s as I want. But semantically, we're saying this is the most important heading. The H1 is the primary heading. And if you've got 6 of them in there, it confuses search engines. So by convention, you'll only probably ever have one H1. And then the other thing that is also kind of convention is that when you're separating the content of your page, like we go in here and we have an H2 and we say, this is the second heading. This is the name of the page I'm on, activity tracker. We probably wouldn't want to have, you wouldn't want to just jump right to an H4, right? You could. There's nothing stopping us from using HTML however we want. But if you think of it like a structure from most important to least important, you want to have some kind of progression through there. So I would start with an H1 that'd be like the name of my product. The H2 would be like the name of my page. And then if I've got like a couple of different articles on there, those might all be H3s. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so for each header, you have to have a paragraph.
No.
No.
There's no rule on what tags you have to use together in general. Like we were building ugly web pages yesterday with just tags sprinkled all over the place.
Yeah.
You can build websites however you want. And all the rules we're going to learn together is like just best practices. So we have a header. This is an H2. I don't have any paragraphs in here at all. No paragraph tags. Because this H2 is describing my application I'm building. I've got a form in here. I've got a list. Now, if I wanted to have another section down here, I might use another H2 and then have more stuff inside of that. But it may or may not be a paragraph. It will be a paragraph if you're just writing a book or a novel or something and you want to write HTML to do it. Yeah, sure. Put an H2 and then follow it with a bunch of paragraphs. But you, as the developer, get to pick what content and what structure comes here.
Okay. Another thing, I remember you using something in VS. How do I keep my sentences from continuing, through the full screen of the Visual Studio? I don't know. Does that matter?
What was the question?
Okay, so you know how you had put like a margin in your VS so that your sentences wouldn't continue across your screen?
Oh, you're talking about word wrapping?
Yeah.
Okay, yep.
How do you do that?
It's up here in... where's that?
Now, does that have anything to do with how your web page looks?
Not at all.
Oh, okay. Because I noticed it didn't matter if I...
If I was to come in here and I could let's put in some random lorem, right? We'll do lorem 1000, right? This is going to display nicely in my editor, and if I change the size of my editor, those words follow it. But I think by default, when you open up Visual Studio Code, word wrap is not turned on.
Okay.
So if I go to View and I turn off word wrap, you're going to see it's one giant long line that scrolls on forever. But if we look at this in the page, this is inside of a div. So how it shows up in the page is completely tied to the CSS that is defining that style.
Okay.
Okay. The word wrap in the editor is really just for us. It's however you like. I used to work with this guy, and he would write lines of code that would stretch on for days and weeks in the future, and I would constantly be scrolling to the right to be like, what is this nonsense say? It's harder when you're reading code if you've got to scroll to the right and left. It's way better to just be able to move up and down. So the rule of thumb is generally like, you don't want to really go, kind of past, 60, 70, 80 characters over on the right. Because you don't know who, like, if I've got a really big wide monitor, and so this is how code normally looks like to me, right? I've got real tiny font. I can see a ton of stuff in here. But if you guys are on a tiny little laptop screen, this might be what your code looks like. So you want to be thoughtful of other developers. Some companies and some projects will set rules for you, and they'll be like, as soon as you get to line 80, or you got 80 characters, so let's just start from the beginning, right? You can see down here it's telling you what column you're on. They'll set a rule that says anything past line 80, you're going to hit enter and go to a new line. So we were talking about like Stylistically, you can add spaces wherever you want. You might have to break that up just based on your company's rules, but there's nothing stopping. Like, it doesn't mean anything to the browser or to the code. It's just we're writing code for everyone else to read. It's not for the computer. The computer is. Let's see if I can show off an example. Let's go to HTML shrink. Yeah, compress HTML, right? So I'm going to paste our HTML up here. I'm going to compress it. This is everything on one line with 0 spaces in it. And if I come into our file here and I replace all my code with this, right? So this is without word wrapping turned on. If I turn on word wrapping, right, everything is smushed. But if I save this, you will notice that nothing changed on this page. HTML doesn't care what the code looks like. If you're working in another language like C or C++, it's going to get compiled into a bunch of 1s and 0s anyway. The computer does not care about our code, but we care about our code. We want this. Like, if I had to work on a project that looked like this, I'd probably quit. I'd be like, this sucks. No, thank you. Right? But this is pleasant for me. It's easy for me to see what's happening. All of my elements have nice spacing around them. I don't have to scroll to the right or left any. Okay? Does that make sense? Cool. What else? What other questions do y'all have? This has been fun. Who has ideas of what they want their portfolio to look like? Anybody want to share off what they think they're going to try and do?
Sure.
What are you planning to do, Gregory? What are you going to put on your portfolio?
I mostly want to put a picture of myself. I was thinking of one of my graduation pictures that I did real nice, and then have it shrink down to a bubble, to like how I do when we have the icons, use the icons and the like little bubble. Um, Best example like Facebook Messenger when it has a little bubble dot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be going. It will scroll down to like I did my picture of myself, say my name and my company. Scroll down, and the bubble scroll down, and like me testing, talking to you about who I am, what I did, project, and etc.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. There are a couple other professions that have portfolios as well. One that comes to mind is photographers. They might have like, here's some of my stuff. Artists will do stuff like that. They'll have a portfolio pretty frequently. Developer portfolios, I have generally found that the most interesting ones are like, here's a little blurb about me at the very top. Here's a link to my resume. Here's how to contact me. And then if I've got any projects that I'm particularly proud of, I might put those in like a couple of boxes as a grid.
Yeah, I will do. I have a template that I made previously in the last week that I just have my introduction, my name, introduction, and if there's right now on HMTL right now, and I'm trying to work on with CSS to make it look pretty.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I'm going to pull up, I found a website that has a list of some really good software developer portfolios. So just to, let's like look.
Can you send it in Slack as well?
Yeah, you just Google what software developer portfolio, and it'll be the top link. So here's a really cool one, right? So he starts off with something big and bold. There's some pretty animations behind it, and it says "View my work." That's the call to action button, and it's got that really nice transition between there and there. And then he's showing off. These are some of my skills that I feel comfortable with. He's talking about like, I build fast websites. My websites are responsive. They're intuitive. They're dynamic. He's got a picture of himself inside of a really cool CSS border. So I bet if we open this image in a new tab, okay. So he cheated. He used Photoshop and made a square image, and he designed that. That's cheating. He's a cheater. And then he shows off some of his projects, right? And this is a really good way to make yourself stand out, because it's kind of saying, hey, I have built this before. Then he's got a little blog in here. That's pretty cool. Go ahead, Andrew.
So, do you have any advice from the standpoint of a junior developer who doesn't have a full list of projects like that? What's something, I'm sure we'll have one or two by the end of this course, but what would you, if you were an employer receiving a website from a junior developer, what could I showcase to really stand out, and also what maybe key things should I include so that
Yeah, excellent question.
I don't know, it's a
I would probably,
mini part question.
if
Sorry.
I was at the beginning of my career and I had very little things to show off formally, let's say you have two things. You're going to have the portfolio itself, which you don't want to show off because you're on the portfolio, and then maybe we have one or two projects. So let's assume we have two things to show off. I would probably focus on having a very clean design that is not too flashy and almost acts more like a resume / contact, easy method of contact. So I would say, maybe I start off the page with something bold like this, like, hello, I am whatever, I am a software engineer. And then maybe I would make sure that there was really good, clean links to here's my resume, here's how to contact me. And then maybe, you might even want to include a paragraph being like, I am a recent graduate of the Clubhouse Code Bootcamp Cohort 12. Like, that is a accomplishment that you're going to be able to be super proud of. And you can write maybe a paragraph or two talking about, in this course, we covered HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Node.js, learning the basic skills required to become a successful professional software engineer, full stack software engineer. I would write a paragraph or two about myself. I would include a picture of yourself like this, maybe, and then leave it at that. I would start off with something super simple that does not try to get in the way of selling yourself to future employers. But what I would then do is, as soon as I go to my next company, or I continue my journey as a developer, as soon as I got something I'm a little bit proud of at all, I would plop it in here, and I would just keep adding to my portfolio over time. So start small. Don't try to make a portfolio that shows off that you're someone with 20 years experience like this guy. Just show off, hey, here's me, here's information about me, here's how to contact me.
Yeah, I would think you should start very simple and just get off from that.
And you'll probably want to include links to your socials. Here's my Twitch, here's my LinkedIn, here's my Facebook. Assuming that those are that you're using those in a way like, if your Facebook is completely personal, like if you're really into politics, we've been in a contentious time. I would not link to a Facebook if you're using that for private reasons. If you're using it for professional reasons, or your Twitter is that way, if you're proud of what you're doing there on those platforms, link it so that people can know that you're a real person. Right? I guarantee you, employers are going to check these socials. Like, I'm going to go check out this dude's LinkedIn. Does this look like a reputable person? Do I even want to waste my time on a phone interview? So when we were talking about LinkedIn last week with the previous guest speaker, she said, go make a LinkedIn, 100%. If you submit yourself for a job application, I am going to look at your LinkedIn. I'm going to look to see if you're posting crazy stuff on Facebook. I'm going to see if you're, doing random things on Twitter. And subconsciously, that's going to affect whether or not I feel like it's even worth my time to call you, right? So you might just, I'm going to be honest, a lot of entry-level positions in the country, right? Like, if I post a junior developer position, I'm going to get 1,000 resumes regardless of what I do. And so I've got to have some kind of method to sort through them. So the ones that are really good are going to stand out, and everybody else, we're going to say, thank you. We'll keep you in mind for future positions. We're looking for, do I feel like this person is going to be a good fit on the team? And it starts at the portfolio. So anything that you put there, this is really going to start the resume. But the resume should have a link to the portfolio. So I know, hey, this person is a web developer, and they're serious about being a web developer because they've made something to show me some of their personality, some of the things they're proud of. You're definitely going to want to include a link to your GitHub repository. If you're applying to be a developer, developers want to know that this person at least codes. So, one of the things we might encourage you to do as you get near the end of the course is all these like week 1, week 2 folders. We're probably going to want to delete those. That's not something to be proud of. That's you learning. But I could easily see an argument for, hey, I'm a recent graduate from Code Bootcamp. If your week 1 and week 2 and week 3 folders are pristine and well commented, I might go through and be able to tell, hey, Andrew has spent a lot of time perfecting the craft of becoming a software developer. If you're proud of it, show it off. If you're not, if it's just some, like, let me pull up an example from my own, right? So we've been in here. What did we have? Week 1. Right? Where was that page? I have to get it this way. File, open folder, week 1. That's fine. So when we're in here, we're in these like weird pages. What was the other one? Whatever, maybe. Gibbs? Yeah. No, that was the net. Whatever. If I probably opened up the wrong one. That's fine. Secret page 2. Oh, folder. You know, the ones that we were making the other day that had just crazy borders and everything was wild. I'm not proud of that. I did it for example purposes. So if that was in my portfolio, I'd probably delete it. Right? Right? This does not showcase my talent or abilities. But everything else, you know, you should show off the things you're proud of for sure. Good question. What else? Who raised their hand? Wendy.
You know how like you was doing the orderly and the unordered.
Yep.
That's an orderly. The unordered and the ordered list. Are you able to you know how like you can do pictures or graphics for your bullets instead of like numbers or dots?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to do that?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
And we can show that off next week. There's a couple
okay.
of different ways to do it. And we can explore all those options. There's like a correct way, right? If I pull up, I just closed that file. Right? So what I would probably do if I was, because there's so many different ways to do this, let's take a look at index.html, right? This one has yep, we're there. Let's add a few more items in here so we can really show this off, right? Oh, I'm in the menu. Let's show this off. So when we were playing with unordered and ordered lists yesterday, oh shoot, go live. Great, we've got this big list. If I inspect this element, because I want to play with it in here first, all of these have a list style type of disk, right? So if I come in here, I would want to do something like li, what is that in? It's in activity log, right? So I'm going to do activity log li, and I'm going to say list style type none, right? That's one way. So I've removed all those dots. Now I can do this in HTML. I can come into here and say inside this, I just want to use image source equals, and then some image that I have somewhere. If I had a flower, a little flower icon, that would be one way to do it. Okay, that would be using HTML to say this is an image and it's important to the content. But there's another way in CSS, and that would be we have this option called list style image, right? And that lets us put in the same type of thing that we were using before. So we can put in a URL. So I could put in that flower image if I had images flower.jpg. I don't have it. Let's just go find a tiny little flower icon. Small.
You still have that smiley face?
The smiley face was Unicode, right? That was text.
Yeah.
So if we just grab this little guy here, copy image address. Let's see what this gives us. Okay, that's giant, but whatever. We'll do this. All right, and we'll. Oh, we need to save this. So we're gonna save this image, and we're gonna put it in our activity project images, and we're gonna say flower.png. Right. So now it's there. We will come back to Visual Studio Code. We can see we've got that flower thing there. So I'm gonna do flower.png. And in theory, yeah, okay. Since it's such a big image, you can see it does this thing. So I think the URL thing lets us, let's say, list style image. If we just search Google for that and we go to W3 Schools, is there a size that we can force in here? No. All right.
I was looking. I was trying to figure it out.
So
but I couldn't.
let's go edit this file real quick. Let me pull up. So this is some of the other stuff that you may or may not have to do ever when you are a developer. So we're going to open this file with an image editor, see if we can quickly show off how we would make this small. So I am not a graphic artist. I'm going to open this up with Paint, and let's see if we can quickly figure out a way to. Let's see, menu. Back. Select. Okay, right. So we know this is a giant image, but we want to crop, rotate. I don't know how to use this stupid program. Let's try another one. Don't save. We're going to open this with Photos. Edit with Photos. See what this does. Yep. Maybe scaling. Crop and rotate. Oh, didn't do what we wanted. Adjustments maybe? Filters. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not an image person. Let's just make
No problem.
Pixlr. This is one I'll use occasionally. Pixlr.com. This is like an online photo editor.
Is it free?
Yep, it's just on a website. So we can come and grab this image real quick. And in here, we want to adjust and filter. Crop and rotate. Let's change this to 24. Nope, that didn't work. Gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, here we go. Resize image. 24. Right. Constrain proportion. Yeah, good. Apply. And I made a tiny little flower. And if I save this, flower.png, great. I download this file. Some folder. And so if I move this into our CBC 12 folder, I move this into CBC 12 activity. And I move this into here, images. It's going to ask me if I want to replace it. I do, yes. Great. And so now when I come to my page, because I've made a small thing, now you can see I have an image, right? I don't work with images. I'm not a designer. I'm not an artist. People that are, you can go do a tutorial online if you want to learn Photoshop and stuff. We need people that are good at that, because that's not me. But that would be how you would do it, with the list style image. Okay. So now our activity tracker has pretty flower images for our list elements. And the cool thing is,
Welcome, Andrew.
What?
I was messing with Andrew. You're welcome.
Then what we can do is, if we were in here, right, like, so you can imagine we build this as a program. If we're inspecting these elements, right, like, let's just select a few, right? Delete. Right? Like, because we've added that style for this element, right, every new element that we add in here would get that. So let's just say we typed in, we typed something in our little box here, and we say, I lifted weights today. Lifted weights. Right? And then when we exit that, each new element is going to have that CSS property that we defined. So it's going to add a flower. Tracking? Yes. Sweet. What else? Cool question. I don't think I've ever used that property before in my entire life. List style type, or list style image.
I was trying to use it the other day. I couldn't figure it out.
Yep. And the secret is that you have to use the this URL thing so that it loads a file. This is one of the few special, like CSS. It's like a CSS function, I guess, where it's telling it to pull this thing in from outside of itself. What else?
Can we set up some time tomorrow?
Yeah. There's a Calendly link that is in the Slack channel. So please pick a time slot, and if everybody wants to meet with me, I'll add more time slots. So just ping me if there's not enough.
Okay.
I think there's 4 by default because we're doing 4 to 6 and there's 30 minutes. But I got all day. I could talk to all of you. We can do more database stuff, Selena, if you want, or we can play with Git or anything and everything. That time belongs entirely to you guys.
How much do you like C++?
I love it enough to write a book about it.
Okay.
My Introduction to Robot Programming book is all C++. It's on Amazon. Oh, come on now. Okay. So this is C++. I wrote this. It's okay. It's an alright language. Just my stupid face. Oh. What else? Anybody? Got 40 minutes left, or we can just chat.
So you said you started this camp? Or was it Chase?
No. So Eric Parker, who's the president of the clubhouse, he spoke to us on day 1. You're going to see him all the time. We've been friends for like, I don't know, however long the clubhouse has been open, 10 years. And we've done a bunch of projects together. And so I don't remember who actually had the idea. He says it's me, but I don't remember having the idea. It was, hey, we should teach software developers in the Augusta area so that we can have more software developers, right? So we had the idea for this course. I started writing this original, I wrote a different curriculum back in the day. We were teaching different stuff, but we spent about 3 or 4 months setting up and getting ready for the first class, and then I immediately got offered the opportunity to go and start my current company, Moonrise. And so I quickly found a replacement instructor. We hired him, interviewed him, and I passed off everything I did over to him, and they've been chugging along ever since. And but yeah, originally I was supposed to be the only instructor. It was me and Eric Parker's little business together, and we had big plans. We had big plans to make Augusta a software developer training hub that would make the world a better place. The other the reason I wrote that robot book is that the project we worked on before Code School, the Code Boot Camp, was we did Sumo Robot League together. So myself, Eric, and Grace, we ran that business for 5 or so years, selling robot kits and teaching middle schoolers how to write C++ to make robots move around.
Is that still going on with the robot sumo thing?
It still exists. We are no longer actively selling it to schools, and that's just mainly because the sales cycle for schools is really, really slow and long. So you'll work your butt off and get a couple of middle schools on board, and they won't even want to talk to you again until the following year. So it's really hard to, if you're ever going to get into an education industry and you're going to sell to schools, just be aware that you will only be able to grow probably like once a year.
So the robot kits, though, what do they include?
Oh yeah, good question. Let me see if you go to sumorobotleague.com. This is a really ugly website that we made that works fine. So individual kits, it comes with the robot, the book, a ring to compete on, and a digital copy of the book. So everything you need to build and program a robot comes in the kit. And I think Eric Parker was saying something like he's got like 200 robot kits ready to go. So if you guys want one.
Okay.
All packaged up, ready to be shipped.
And they're like $100-something.
Yeah, like 120.
The whole kit. So It's got the book and the thing, and that's 120.
Yeah, and I think these pricing, this is like the a la carte price, but we sell kits that have everything together for about 120.
Okay. What are your thoughts on Raspberry Pi?
I love Raspberry Pi. I've had and played with many of them. There's lots of really cool projects you can do with them.
Can you
Okay.
only program it with Python, or you can use whatever?
Yeah, I'm going to stop this recording so it looks like we're drifting into let's have fun territory, and nobody wants to watch video of that.